Howdy guys. Okay, so one of my favorite parts about creating these levels is the terrain, and I don't know why I like making terrain so much, but it's really fun, and I really get into trying to get them looking realistic, or at least, you know, like they really fit in the level. So what we're going to do is cover the basics of creating terrain with the Houdini engine, getting all the materials and textures and stuff like that all hooked up. All right, so let's do a quick review of what we're going to cover throughout this section. So we're going to learn how to build terrains with Houdini with height fields. Okay, and we're going to look at how we can allow for changes in the H engine by changing the size on the fly inside of the Houdini engine. All right, that way you can choose how large your terrain is. We're also going to have to go and actually upgrade the Houdini engine for this, especially for Unity, because they made a bunch of changes to the terrain system in Unity. And so the Houdini engine accommodated that, so we need to upgrade to the latest to get, or to take advantage of all those latest features. All right. And we're going to learn how to create layers for texturing. So we're going to walk through the process of masking out our terrain by different terrain features and creating some cool layering. And we're then going to hook up a Unity material. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And we're going to go and hook up the landscape material inside of Unreal and take a look at how we can pull in all the terrain layer information and texture it. Okay, so lots to cover. Let's get started. Okay, so as usual, to get everything kicked off with our terrain, let's go and get our HDA set up and just really get a quick height field in place, okay? All right, so let's start setting up our terrain HDA. Alrighty, so I'm going to go and drop down a geometry node here. All right, and I am going to actually build this out a little bit differently this time, okay? So let's call this terrain. Let's just give it the name terrain, like so. But what we're going to do with this terrain is we're also going to scatter things on it and maybe create other types of objects like larger rocks and stuff like that. And so what I really want to do is I want to create a couple of nodes here. So I'm going to call this scatter points. And then we'll basically have another one called trees. All right. And then we'll do grasses. Like so, and I think we'll stick to that for right now, okay? Cool, so what I want to do is select all these guys and hit Shift-C on the keyboard. And look at that, we actually have a subnet, but we're at the object level up here, okay? And that means that we've created an object level HDA with a bunch of geometry nodes inside of it. And this is really cool, and you'll start to see once we get more in depth with these compound HDAs, or what I like to call compound HDAs. You'll see why this is beneficial inside of Unity and inside of Unreal. All right, it basically will separate all of our geometry out for us. All right, so with that, let's go and call this subnet IP terrain creator. How about that? All right, so I'm going to go and say create digital asset. All right, and we're going to lop off the name there, like so. And I'm just going to capitalize these guys. Cool. And then we want to save it into our Houdini project. All right, perfect. Hit accept. And you'll notice this time we don't get the destroy spare parameters warning. And we have a lot less default UI. And that's just because this is a subnet, not a geometry node. All right, so let's still go and hide our default UI. There we go. Perfect. And we're good with the type properties window now, so let's close it out. And what I'm going to do is dive inside to the terrain node inside of this subnet. Okay, and so inside of here, what I want to do is drop down a height field node. Okay, and this height field node will basically give us a starter terrain. All right, so this is your starter terrain right there, and we can go and give it some really rough noise and stuff like that. So let's just drop down a height field noise. Like so. And just kind of rough it up a little bit. Cool. There we go. So now we got some really rough terrain. Now this is pretty large. This is 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters. All right. So we're going to leave it at that default for now. All right. We'll talk a little bit more about all these settings as we get through this section. Okay. But with that, let's close out this lecture and move forward in the next. Howdy guys. Okay, so when working with terrains using the Houdini engine, we actually need to really pay attention to our terrain size. Alright, and this is even true when you're working with terrains inside of Unity or Unreal. They have very specific sizes that you should probably stick to. That being said, you can still have odd sizes, but having a terrain size of a power of 2 is usually recommended for all of its automatic LODing and accuracy and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is show you how to work with the terrain sizes in the Houdini engine. Alright, that way we have it all set up and we don't have to worry about it. Alright, and we can pick a terrain of any size, all the way up to like 8096 or something like that. So anyways, let's move forward and start looking at our terrain size. Alright, so I've opened up the Unity Houdini engine documentation and the Unreal documentation, and I've gone into Unity's terrain option here and into Unreal's landscape options right here. The technology is basically the same for both of these. All right, it's all height-based, height fields and stuff like that. All right, and so what we're really interested in here, right off the bat, before we dive into all this other information, right down here, and all these guys down here, what we're mostly interested right now is learning how to set up these terrain sizes. So it recommends that we utilize these terrain sizes. And in Unreal, it's got the same sort of values. All right, they're just a little bit different. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to set up our terrain sizes such that the user, when they use our HDA, can just select a size from a dropdown. All right, so I'm going to show you guys another type of parameter we can add to our HDAs, and we're going to start to get a little bit more intermediate with our HDAs, creating some actual dynamic interactions between the user interface and what's happening in the HDA. All right, so let's start with Unity's over here, and I'll walk you guys through it, and I'll most likely go through and make a separate version for Unreal. But if you follow along with the Unity version, you'll be just fine. We're going to set it up exactly the same way. All right, just the numbers will be different. Okay, cool. So let's go back to Houdini over here. And what I want to do is I want to open up the type properties window for my terrain creator. All right, so we can just open that from here without having to go up and out. Cool, so here's our type properties window. And what I want to do is I want to create a folder first. So let's do this first. I'm going to create a folder. This is going to be called terrain. All right, and I'm going to hit apply. And then inside of that, I'm going to drag and drop an ordered menu parameter into that folder. All right, these folders are great when you are starting to deal with more of these compound HDAs that have more than one system inside of it. All right, in this case, what we're doing is we're creating a terrain, and then we're going to scatter points onto it, and we're going to create trees onto it, and grasses and rocks, and we're going to import the tracks so we can clear areas out. All right, this is a really big system, and so we can actually organize our user interfaces for our HDAs by using these folders. Okay, we'll talk more about that. We'll get more advanced with that. Let's focus on this ordered menu right here. What I'm going to do is just call this terrain underscore size. All right, for the label, the same. So terrain size. And what we can do with this, let's actually just hit apply right away. Okay, and then let's go up and out so we can look at our UI for this guy. So you can see that we now have a drop down up here, and it's inside of this tabbed folder. All right, now this is just a preference of mine. I usually like to set these to collapsible. Right, that way it just looks cleaner, smaller UI. Right. Okay, so back to our ordered menu. We currently have this drop down menu that doesn't have any entries in it. So to add more entries to this particular drop down, we go to the menu tab here, and inside of here, we start typing in all those numbers. All right, so let's go look at the documentation again. So I'm just going to scooch this off to the side over here. Maybe we do that and do that, like so. Yeah, much better. This will allow us to type in all of our values. So what I want to do is I want to type in these values right here in order from lowest to highest. So I'm going to say 65, 65 for the token and for the label. Okay, and then I want to do 129 and 129. There we go. 257, All right, we're just going to go through the whole list like so. 513. And these are all the sizes of terrains that the Houdini engine really likes to work with inside of Unity. And again, like I mentioned before, these are all the sizes that Unreal likes to work with. So you would just literally, if you're using Unreal for this course, you just type in these numbers. Same way I'm typing in the numbers for Unity. Okay? So we're going to go and type in 125 or 1025 by 1025 and 2049 by 2049. Okay? And then 4097 by 4097 and 8193 by 8193. That is a huge terrain. All right, then I hit apply. Okay, cool. So now I don't need all of this anymore, so I'm just going to snap my Houdini back in place. Awesome. So look at that. In our drop-down now, we have all those values. So what we want to do is we want to hook up this number here such that when it's assigned to the terrain, it changes the size in both the X and the Z. Okay, so I'm going to copy the parameter by right-clicking on the actual drop-down. And I'm going to jump inside here, and I am going to assign it to size X. So I'm going to say paste relative references. But you'll notice that our terrain is now completely gone, basically. There is no dimension in the X direction. All right, so to inspect this further, to debug it, you can click on the size label, and you can see we're getting a value of 0. All right, so if I were to go up and out and change the value, so let's change it to something like 1025 and jump back in. You can see the values turned to 4, and it's basically giving us the index of the current menu item, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So number 4 is 1025. What we want to do is we want to use the menu items token as value. We want the actual number, okay? So I'm going to check that on and hit apply. And come up to the top up here, and let's just switch it one more time. And there we go. Look at that. Very cool. Now, when we first go create it, our channel says that it's going to be a default of 0. So what I want to do is give it a default of 513, I think. Something nice and small. That way it creates itself really quickly inside of the engine, and then you can go change it to whatever you want from there. All right, so I'm going to hit apply and accept. There we go. So now, when I change this drop down, I get a larger and a smaller terrain. All right. I'm definitely not going to do a terrain that big. That's huge. All right. Let's stick to the 513 just to keep things moving quickly here inside of the video or the lecture. All right. So the next thing we need to do, I need to copy the size X. I'm going to copy that parameter and just make sure that we always have a square terrain. It needs to be a power of 2. All right. If you look at the documentation over here, the Unity's height map resolution must be a power of 2 plus 1. Okay. So that's why we are locking it to this and not exposing it so that the end user can make the terrain of whatever the size they want. Let's just keep it so that it's kosher with the H engine. All right, so with that, I'm going to close out this lecture, and in the next lecture, we are going to move forward and start to get our terrain all worked in. All right. Okay, so let's test this out now inside of Unity and see if our terrain is getting generated. All right, so you can do the same process with Unreal and see the same results. Okay, so I am going to open up Unity and get started. All right, so I've gone ahead and imported the HDA into Unity already. So I'm going to drag and drop it into the hierarchy view. And look at that, we have terrain, but it's all pink. That's super weird. So our first issue with this currently is that we need to upgrade our Houdini engine and our Houdini version. So since in the time that I've been recording this, there's been some fixes and updates to the terrain system inside of Unity and also fixes to the Houdini engine to accommodate for 2019.2, for Unity 2019.2. So we need to upgrade to the latest version of Houdini, which I believe is 17.5.380, and we got to get the latest Houdini engine going. So You also notice that if I were to go over to my terrain over here, when I open up the terrain size, the terrain disappears and we get this warning over here. And it's telling us, well, it's down here, it's telling us that the height map resolution needs to be a minimum of 33, but it's currently set to 00. And that's just because that conversion inside of Houdini over here, and this is the same for Unreal as well. The conversion up here isn't working. So when we looked at our ordered menu and we set the use menu item token as value, it's not doing that conversion in Houdini Engine. So I wanted to point that out, and then I'm going to show you guys how to actually get that working, because I still want to keep the drop down, but I want to actually do a little bit of processing on my own, and we will write a little bit of X to get the sizes out appropriately. Okay? So I'm going to hit apply and accept, and I'm going to leave you guys there. In the next lecture, we are going to upgrade our Houdini engine to Houdini 17.5.380. So at this point, you should go and download that version of Houdini or higher, right? Because it's pretty up to date. That's pretty recent. And so I would go and get the latest versions. And in the next lecture, I'll show you how to replace the Houdini engine inside of Unity. For Unreal, you're good to go. It'll just overwrite the version that's already inside of your Unreal version. So with Unity, we have to do a couple of extra steps to get that working. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so I wanted to walk you guys through the process of upgrading the Houdini engine. All right, just so you guys can see me do it, because it can be quite intimidating to just blow away the Houdini engine folder inside of Unity. And if anything, pops up, definitely let me know on the course forums. I'll definitely help out as best I can. But I just want to walk you through and show you what I do, right? Just so you guys can see the steps. All right, so let's go into the lecture. All righty, so I've opened up Houdini Core 17.5.380 and basically upgraded the HIP file, all right, in the Houdini project. Just by opening up the file, you're good to go. Okay, so everything still is in working order over here. So we have our terrain and our track, our bumpers, our guardrails, our cone, and our tire stack. All right, so what I want to do now is get Unity all sorted out. So the Houdini side of things are figured out. Let's just go and get Unity back in sorts. Okay, so first step in all of this is definitely save and close the scene that has all your HDAs in it. Just just create a new empty scene. So just go and say File, New Scene. All right. That way you don't break any of the HDAs. I've seen it where I've tried to upgrade while I've had the HDAs in an open scene, and they all got hosed. I didn't lose any of my work. I just had to re-import all the HDAs and then rebuild all of them. And I still kept the user curves. But anyways. All right. So the next step in this whole process is to go to Houdini Engine session and say close all sessions. All right. So that way it's not running, the server in the background is not running. So we just disconnect it and everything like that. This way when we go and try to connect, we don't have a previous session running using the new version. All right. So now we're going to go to plugins and just obliterate or hit delete the Houdini Engine Unity folder. All right, so I'm just going to do that. Hit delete. All right, you can leave the Houdini Engine asset cache in there. Those are just temp folders that the Houdini Engine will create anyways if they're not there. And so after a little bit of recompiling there, right, because Unity needs to recompile the project because all those scripts were taken away, then you'll notice also up here the Houdini Engine folder or menu item isn't available anymore. All right, so this means now we have a clean scene. We've removed all that Houdini Engine plugin stuff. So all I need to do is I've gone and opened up the folder for the newer version. So here's 17.5.380. All right, and what I'm going to do is go in here and go into Engine, Unity, and we are just going to drag and drop this into my project panel over there. And I'm going to let this load up the package so we can see everything. And then we just want to import. this is probably going to happen to you because the version numbering has increased quite a bit, and because we upgraded from, we made quite a jump. If you look at the logs for all the different builds, they really fixed up a ton to accommodate 2019.2. So we just need to now shut down Unity and relaunch it. Okay, so I went and relaunched Unity there. So let's go and check this again. So we definitely need to open up a new session. So we'll close the default session and create a new pipe session. And there we go. So we got a new pipe session created there. You can see down at the bottom. All right, so let's go and open up our Racetrack Tools scene. So we'll go to Racetrack Tools main. Open that back up, and there we go. Very cool. Okay, so with that, we are now upgraded to the latest version of the Houdini engine. And we're going to get all those cool new fixes for the terrains. Okay, a bunch of stuff. So materials and instancing, tree prototypes, bunch of stuff. So I highly encourage you to check the logs. So let me actually go and let's do SoundEffects website. Oops, did one too many there. So soundeffects.com. And I'm just showing you guys where you can go check the logs. All right, so if you go to download, and I just need to log in there. Alrighty, come down here. Here's the changelog journal under daily builds, and if you go in there, it's actually good that we're covering this because it can be confusing how to read this stuff. You can actually filter it out up here. By Houdini engine. Somewhere around here for Unity plugin. What will happen is it will show you all the current upgrades. So they even have a newer one. I mean, and they do this every day, right? So you can see they've been working on the height field stuff quite a bit. Lots of terrain work lately. This is the one that we're interested in too for Unity specifically. Added support for using Unity material string attribute to specify the existing Unity material to use for terrain generation. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. Okay, cool. So that's how you find out what's going on in the Houdini world, or at least in the versions. All right, from a production standpoint, you definitely want to pay attention to all this stuff. Okay, I'm going to close out the lecture there and move on to the next. Okay, so now that we're all upgraded and stuff, let's go take a look at fixing the size parameter using our ordered menu. All right, so we need to write a little bit of X to do this, but nothing crazy. Okay, so let's jump back into Houdini and get going. Okay, so let's go and fix up our issue with our terrain size over here. So I'm going to go and pop open the type properties, and I actually went ahead and I went and changed the numbering for the token over here. Okay. And I kept the use menu item token as value because we know that we're getting an integer value that goes from 0 to 7, and it represents the different sizes. Unfortunately, we can't convert this label, not directly through the channel, not that I found at least, to a number. And so what we got to do is a little bit of a workaround. All right, so this is what I usually do with this. I drop down a null node over here, and this is just going to be called like start data or something like that. You would name it wherever. I just like to indicate where my data nodes are. Okay, and then I drop down a wrangle node, like so. And I'm going to set this to detail because I only need it to run once every single time this network cooks. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to get the current value of that menu. All right, so I want to get this current value, whatever it's set to. I want to get this token value. So a really easy way to do that in Vex here is to write out a local variable, and I'm going to call this local variable size ID. And that's going to be equal to a channel or integer channel, so CHI. So we have an integer channel. And I'm going to call this the size ID. Same thing. All right. So now that we've created that spare parameter, we need to actually create it so it's visible here. Okay. And then I can go and hook this up to this guy. So I'm just going to right click on this and say copy parameter and go back in here and just paste it there. Right? So now we're going to get that value there. Very cool. Awesome. So now what we can do is we can initially set the size. So I'm going to say f at size is equal to 65, okay? And we actually want to, well, we'll keep it as a float, it's fine. As long as we keep the whole numbers. All right, so what I want to do is I want to check to see what the value is. So I'm going to say if size ID is equal to 1, then our at size is equal to 129. All right, so let's just take a look at that. I'm going to hit apply and accept so we can take a look at our geometry spreadsheet down here. Now if I go to the detail attribute area, you can see that my size is currently set to 65. So let's go, let me pin this. All right, so let's go up here and let's switch it to 129. And look at that, it turns to 129. Okay, so we need to set up the other numbers now. So let's dive back in and we can do another else if. So we can say else if size ID is equal to 2. All right. Then let's take a look at the number. Let's open this up over here. We want 257, so we can just copy this, put this down here, say 257. Cool. And we just keep on going, so until we run out of numbers. And by default, it'll always be set to 65. All right, or you can change it too. We can always change the default, so it sets to 513, so that's going to be 3. So now we'll set the default to 3. There we go. All right, so 2 and then 3 is going to be 513. Keep it in the 6. There we go. And 4 is going to be 1025. And 5 is going to be 249 or 2049. All right, let's paste another one. 6 is going to be 4097. And this is going to be for number 7, 8193. All right, then Control Enter on the keyboard to commit the code. There we go. So let's hit apply and accept. And let's go back up and out and test out our dropdown. So now can we get 257? There we go. Very cool. 1025, 4097. Sweet. All right, so that's our size now. So we're successfully converting it to a float value. So now what I want to do is I want to get that value. So to get that, remember, we just use our detail function, and we want to get that information from the attribute wrangle1 there. Should probably call it something different. We should probably say calc size, something like that. All right. So let's redo this. There it is. Cool. And we want to get the size attribute in the first component. And now it is set to 4097. Cool. So let's go and copy this guy. So copy parameter and paste. And now we have a large terrain with lots and lots of noise on it there. It's probably too much. That's going to take a bit to process. There we go. All right, so let's jump up and out and change this to something more workable while I'm recording. Very cool. So now we can change it to 129, 257. Very nice. All right, so let's go and test this out inside of Unity really quick. So all I need to do is just save the node type. All right. Go back into Unity over here, and in our HDA folders, we want to pop those guys open. And I'm going to get the latest version, like so. Cool. And let's go and rebuild this guy. See what happens. Oh, we got something weird there. No GeoNode name with name attribute wrangle1. Unable to set height field preset. That's interesting. And it looks like now what we have to do in the latest version of Houdini Engine is give it a material to assign, or it won't actually show up. So here I have the material, the terrain is building. You can see it when you actually click on this. It's got data in here, but no material has been assigned. And when I go and assign a material that I made really quickly, I get my terrain back. Alright, so we need to go and automatically assign the material as well. So let's do that in the next lecture. Okay, so let's finish up with our terrain by adding the material property to it. So I'm going to show you guys both how to do it in Unity and how to do it in Unreal in this video, okay? Because it's basically the same. Alright, so let's jump back into Houdini. Okay, so let's jump into our terrain node here. And now that we're calculating the size appropriately, we need to do one more thing for Unity specifically. For Unreal, when you import this into Unreal, it'll show up because Unreal has a default landscape material built into it. Alright, whereas Unity is looking for a material to be assigned to it. But if you do have a custom material for your landscape, which I'll cover here in a little bit once we get through some of the masking and layering and stuff like that, I'll show you guys how to set up a landscape material inside of Unreal. But for now, I just want to show you how to set up the attributes. So let's go and create another attribute wrangle node over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this my Unity material, just so I can keep it straight. Alright, so in this one, what I'm going to do is right after the height field noise right there, I'm going to type in S for string, @ then Unity _ material. Alright, and this is going to be equal to a material I made inside of Unity. Alrighty. And it's super easy. All I did was made a new material. And I went to the nature. Alright, this is 2019.2. And I set it to the standard terrain. Okay. So what I need to do is get a copy of this material, or it's copy its path. It's the same in Unreal. Alright. Then you just want to go and paste it in there. Alright. What is required by Unity though, what's specific to Unity is that we need to set it to the height layer. So you got to hit this little drop down. You should see mask and height in there right now. Okay, so you want to set it to height. And that's required so that it applies the material appropriately. Okay, so for Unreal, alright, I'm going to drop down another attribute wrangle node. So this is going to be the Unreal material. Like so. Alrighty. And for this guy, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to say S @ Unreal material. And not capitalized when you underscore there. There we go. And I am going to put an equals after this. There we go. Equals, and we have to get the path to the material. So I'll fill that out once we get to the Unreal side of things. Okay? So I'm just going to leave it there for now. Very cool. Save the scene. I'm just going to leave this guy as the display material for now. And we are going to right-click on our terrain creator node and say Save Node Type. Now we can go back into Unity and update our terrain. Alright, so I want to actually make it so I can't see this anymore. So I'm going to set this back to 513. Alright, and it actually did update it. So let me just blow this away here. And let me drag it back out into the scene. Just want to get it back to the point where we had it. Alright, and you can see by default right now, because we haven't updated the HDA, the material, if you go to the little settings tab, alright, by selecting the terrain right here, the material is empty, so it's not showing me anything. Alright, so let's fix that. So let's open up our folders, and let's go and update our HDA. Go back into Unity over here, and let's do a rebuild on our HDA. And it definitely doesn't like to do the rebuild for some reason, so let's drag it back out and see what happens. So we're still not getting the material hooked up, and let's go back to Unity and see why. So everything looks good there. That looks good. Oh, this needs to be on the primitives. Same with the Unreal version. So put that to primitives. Alright, that's required. Okay, so let's go and save that again. Save node type. And let's go back to Unity. And we've got our folders here. And I'm going to copy this guy over. And we'll do a rebuild. There we go. Now we're automatically assigning the material. And look at that. We now have terrain. Super cool. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to start to work with the terrain. I want to show you guys how to work with terrain before we get into snapping the road to the terrain or the terrain to the road kind of thing. What I want to do is I want to show you guys how to get this puppy textured, all right, using the masking and layers inside of Houdini. All right, so let's start that process in the next lecture. Okay, so let's get started with our terrain texturing by creating all the layers that are necessary for Unity and Unreal. So in Unity, they're referred to as splat maps, and in Unreal, they're referred to as terrain layers. All right, so let's jump back into Houdini and start building out our layers. Okay, so let's keep moving forward and let's start building our first couple set of layers here. Alrighty, so what I want to do is I want to pull these guys down, and really what I'm going to do is just put down a null, and we'll say final terrain. That way we can move it a little bit easier. There we go. And I'm going to wire this guy up, and then we'll just keep moving it down, you know, as we are working. So now I can just move these guys together, like so. Very cool. And then we can organize them horizontally. There we go. Cool. Okay, so what I want to do here now is I want to actually give myself a little bit of erosion and show you guys how that works. So let's drop down a height field erode. Now we're going to be careful with this because, you know, the higher frames that you add or more time you add to the erosion, the longer it's going to take for your HDA to actually cook. So I'm going to freeze it at something like 5. I just want a little bit of erosion, okay? And so what's happening right now is it's cruising through up to frame 20 to create the erosion effects. And it should happen here pretty soon. One way you could always go and speed this up too is to change the grid size to something like 4 on the height field. It'll make your terrain look more blurry because there's less resolution, but it'll run faster. So when you're working, you know, you could just decrease the resolution on the terrain and the erosion will go faster. In fact, at some point we should, you know, promote the grid size up to our HDA parameters so we can adjust it in engine as well. So I'm going to let this finish here and be right back. Alright, so there's the result, and we go to our visualization tab and hit compute range. We'll get a better coloring of the actual object there. Alright, so pretty cool. You get some really nice effects with all this. What I want to do is put this back down to something like 5. I don't really want a ton of erosion right now, just a little bit, you know, goes a long way here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop down a time shift node. This will allow me to control the erosion time inside of the Houdini engine. All right, so to get this to work, what I'm going to do is just turn off this guy right here and just set this to 5. Now what this will do is it'll tell the erode node to go to frame 5, and we're freezing it frame 5 right now too. So this gives us control over how much time. So we should probably add our erosion to our type property. So let's do that. So I'm going to go do my time shift. And now this guy is going to control the erosion. So inside of here, let's add a separator. And I'm going to put that guy in there and the separator in there. There we go. And I'm going to name the time shift frame to erosion time. It's basically the amount of time we let the erosion node run. All right, and I'll set this to 0 to 20. Anything over that really takes a long time inside of the Houdini engine, and so I usually just clamp it at that. Cool. And I'm going to hit accept. There we go. So now we've got that all controlled. All right, so I'm going to go to the erosion node and turn off visualization. We don't need that right now. And I'm also going to come up here and turn off the hide other objects. Cool. So now we got a little bit of erosion. One other thing I want to do is drop down a slump node, so height field slump. This allows us to move debris that's created from the erosion node down the mountain a little bit more. And it makes everything just feel a little bit more realistic. All right, and what we want to do is we want to actually move the debris that's created by this erosion node. And to visualize that layer, okay, or any layer on a height field, we want to drop down a height field visualize node. Okay, and so we come down here, height field visualize. And if we take a look after this time shift node here, alrighty, and we get rid of all these colors. We don't need any of that. Okay, and we set this to black, like so. And then we can select debris from our list and color it purple or whatever color we want to color it, right? So you can mess around with the colors like that. Okay, very cool. So we're going to set one of these up so we can visualize how all of our layers are coming together. In this case, I really wanted to show you how all this stuff works, okay? And so in the layer bindings tab on the slump node, you can see that the material to slump is currently set to mask. And they set this to the default because they're expecting people to provide some sort of mask to say, hey, I want all this material to slump. But in this case, I want to take all that debris that was created by the erosion node, and I want to slump that. So let's take a look at this, and we'll take a look at the results here. Okay, so now we're going to slump the debris. So we're going to move it down the hill a little bit more. So you can see that we're actually moving it down the hill, and it's collecting down at the bottoms. So it makes it feel just a little bit more realistic, and you have control over all that stuff. You can change all these values to get different looks. Very cool. Okay? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You also notice that in the layer bindings tab, the output layers are flow and flow dir. So let's take a look at those. Let's go to this height field visualization, and let's go to flow. Wow, look at that. So that slump node is actually creating this flow field for us. And it's also giving us the X and Y directions. So there's the X, there's no Y, and the Z. Pretty cool stuff. So we can use all that information to texture our terrains with. All right, so there we go. Let's get our first layer hooked up. It'll be really easy now that we've got all of our erosion and everything. So let's go and create a new mask clear. So I'm going to say clear. I'm just going to say start typing out clear in here. And we'll say height field mask clear. Now what we can do with this, it's kind of deceiving a little bit. What we want to do is we want to create a mask that just covers the whole thing. And that'll become our rock mask. And so with this mask clear node, we can actually set this value to 1. And we get a full mask. You can also drop down a volume wrangle. So you can come down here and say volume wrangle. And we could say that the mask, let's do this, we'll say at mask is equal to 1. And you get the same effect. Okay, so just a couple ways to do all that stuff. All right, so we'll call this our base layer. And I am going to hook this into the final deal like so. And I'm going to close out the lecture there. And in the next lecture, we're going to go and create our dirt layer and get our rock layer all situated. Okay, very cool. All right, let's keep moving forward and add on our dirt layer and modify our rock layer. All right, so what I want to do is I want to go to my base layer there and turn it on. And I'm going to, after that, drop down a feature node. So height field mask by feature. This is going to be one of your core nodes when working with layers. All right. And by default, it's set to mask by slope, but you can mask by lots of things. You can mask by height, curvature, direction, occlusion, all those fun things. And so what I'm really interested in here is masking by slope. Okay, so I'm going to set the max slope angle to 90, and I'm going to get rid of this little guy. This is basically just a fall off at the end. All right, so if we were to pull this way down, you can see that we can open up kind of a hole on slopes that are above that threshold. All right. And I don't really want to do that. I just want to leave this like this. Okay? Right, because we want to find all the rocky areas. And so I want to say my min slope angle is probably around, something like 32, 31. All right, that's where all the rock is. All right. And I'm actually going to invert that. All right, so that's where all of our dirt is. Very cool. And then what I want to do here is I want to run this through a remap. So let's remap this. So height field remap. This allows us to remap values to another range, okay? So I'm going to turn that guy on there. And what I'm going to do, instead of remapping the height, I'm just going to set this to mask. Now this allows me to then go and mess around with these values and really create more of a clamped fall off there, because I don't want, you know, a gradient blending into my rock from my dirt. So it'll just look very unrealistic. And so this is what we do basically to clamp those guys down. I just want to, you know, move these two sliders around until I get something that I like. And I actually want to keep some of these lower areas with some rock exposed down there. So I'm just pulling this guy back a little bit more. There, very cool. All right, and so we're going to say clamp minimum to maximum and minimum and clamp maximum. Okay, and what I want to do now is subtract that from my rock. Okay, so what I'm going to do is drop down a height field layer node to do this. This lets us blend different layers together. And in this case, I want to take my base layer here, which is going to become my rock layer, and I want to subtract out everywhere that there's dirt. All right, because inside of the Houdini engine, well, inside of the game engines, they don't want your masks to overlap. All right, so I don't want to have, you know, a mask underneath my dirt mask for my splat maps or my layers inside of Unity and Unreal. All right, so this is why we got to subtract it out. So what I'm going to do is just set the layers to mask, and I'm going to say subtract. And that leaves us with our rock. Very cool. So now these two guys are exact opposites of each other. Very nice. So what we need to do now is put these into custom layers. Currently, if I were to hover over this node right here and go to the little info button, all right, you can see we have a bunch of masks here. Okay, and I'm actually going to blast away some of these guys. We should actually get rid of this right after the erosion steps. So we'll do that here in just a second. But we have all these layers, and all these layers become the layers inside of your game engines. Okay, this is how the Houdini engine actually sets up the splat maps or the layer information inside of Unreal. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to drop down a copy layer node, so height field copy layer node, because I want to make my own custom layer out of this. I don't want to call it mask. I need to call it something else. So inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the source mask, the red area here, is going to become a new layer called rock. And now if I were to hover over this little info button here, I now have a rock layer. Super cool. And that rock layer, if I were to utilize my visualization node, my height field visualization node, so let's put that into the stream there. If I were to take a look at this, and let's actually put in a clear mask right above it so it doesn't get in the way of our colors. Okay? If I do that, what I can do is I can come in here and visualize that. Rock. So I'm going to say rock. And I'm going to give it more of a rocky color. Because why not? We can do whatever we want. Alright, so you can play around with the colors all you want. Cool. I'm just going to leave it on that kind of bluish gray. That's what I usually do. Alright, so that becomes all of our rock. Okay? For our particular terrain. And honestly, now that I'm looking at it, we might want to do something like 45. It's a little too much rock. And that's a little too little. I want a little bit more. Just a little bit more. There you go. Cool. Very nice. I guess 31 was pretty good. I don't know. I always go back and forth with all that stuff. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is close out the lecture there. And in the next lecture, we're just going to keep building more layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up 3 base layers for you guys. So I'm going to do rock, dirt, grass, and maybe we'll throw in the erosion lines. All right, so you get all like the kind of the flow fields. And I'll show you how to make a cool little effect with all those guys. All right, so we'll do this over the course of a few lectures to get all these guys built up. All right. Okay, so let's keep moving forward with our terrain layers. And this time what I want to do is set up the dirt layer. So I want to copy it to its official layer. I want to delete all the layers that we don't need anymore. And I also want to start the grass layer. So That's kind of our to-do list. So let's jump back into Houdini and get going. Alrighty, let's create our dirt layer now. So since we've got our dirt layer now, it's right here, I'm going to put it into another copy layer, so height field copy layer, like so. And what I want to do is I want to take the source mask, alright, and put it into a layer called dirt, like that. Alright, cool. So now on this guy, we have a dirt layer. So let's go get rid of all this stuff too. So what I'm going to do is come up here right after the slump node. I'm going to actually drop down the blast node, of all things. And what I can do really quickly is just come in here and get rid of bedrock. I don't need the debris anymore. Well, let's leave debris behind. I might do something with that. Alright, so we'll say flow, I don't need, we can recreate the flow in a better way. So I'm going to show you guys. We need height. We don't need the, well, we need the mask, actually. And we don't need sediment or the water for now. Alright, so if we now look at our setup, we just have mask, height, and debris. Alright, so that's how we get rid of the layers really quickly. Cool. Alright, so on this copy layer, what I need to do is add another option in here. So I want to add another layer that is called dirt. But this particular dirt, if I were to look at it in the height field visualize, is the exact same as the rock. Alright, you can see when I switch it over. It's exactly the same. Okay? So what we need to do is we need to replace it with the contents of this guy. Because we named the layers the same, if I drop down a height field layer node, so I'm going to use my history down here. Okay? If we come in here and turn this on, and instead of that wildcard, we replace it with dirt and keep this on replace, what will happen is it will replace that dirt layer that was once the rock, alright, with our dirt from this guy right over here. So let's move our visualization down a little bit, like so. And let's take a look. So now if I put dirt in here, oh, look at that. It's exactly where there isn't rock, so it's the exact opposite. Alright, so let's color this like a dirt color. Very cool. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it like that. Alright, so with that, we now have our dirt layer all ready to go. So if we take a look at all of our layers we have so far. Alright, we have mask, height, debris, dirt, rock. Alright, very cool. That is nice and clean. So let's start working on the grass. So let's pull off of where we have the dirt over here. Okay, so let's start to modify this. And what I want to do is I kind of want to just shrink in where there's dirt. Because wherever there's dirt, there's probably going to be chances of, there being grass. And so what I'm going to do is create a height field shrink. I think they have that. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So I'm going to put that into that height field shrink, which is really just a height field blur, but it's set to shrink. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And you notice that we get this really weird looking, but cool still, looking mask. Alright, so it's gone and it just kind of shrunk the dirt mask. So I'm going to do something like that really quick. And for us to be able to visualize this a little bit easier, I kind of like to hook up the grass layer over the dirt layer just so I can visualize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and do another height field copy layer, alright, because I need to create the layer now. So I'm going to just say this is fine for now. And I'm going to take that mask and put it into a grass layer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another copy layer over here. Okay, so we'll do copy layer. Cool. And I'm going to take whatever mask is in here currently, which is the rock, and I'm going to create a grass layer here and do our layering. So then I just need to do a layer replace. Oops. Let's do a layer. Height field layer. There we go. Cool. So I'm going to say that grass is now equal to that grass that's coming in from this side. There. So let's move our visualization down a little bit over here. And let's hook up our grass. So I'm going to select the grass from the layer there. And it's not looking like it's really coming through that well, which is kind of odd. Let's make this a green color. Yeah, we're not really getting any grass there. So let's take a look and see what's going on. So here we go. We have that mask. Okay, we have this copy layer. So mask and grass there. We're replacing grass. Maybe we need to clamp it. Maybe we need to clamp this guy. It's a good idea, really, actually, to turn these guys on. Just make sure all your layers are from 0 to 1. Alrighty, so let's take a look at our layers here. We have grass. And this guy is not wanting to update, oddly enough. Let's turn this guy off. Not showing it. That's weird, huh? Yep. Maybe I got the layers all mixed up here. So let's do rock here. Sorry about that. So let me set this up really quick. Oh, and I know why it wasn't working the other way around. So you can actually still do it like this. We forgot to subtract the dirt. So I want this to be grass. Alrighty, we need to do one more thing here. So now that we have this shrink here, and I've got my dirt that I'm replacing up here, I actually need to subtract. So we need another height field layer down here. And I need to come in here, and before, actually, it's actually up here. Pardon me. Because this is where we're creating that copy layer. So what I need to do is I actually need to take in the current dirt from the remap up here. Alright, and I want to basically subtract it. So this is our grass. This is where we're coming up with our grass here. I need to subtract the grass, or I need to subtract the grass from the dirt, basically. Alright, so I'm going to turn this guy on. And in here, we're going to say mask, and we're going to do a subtract. There we go. So now we're left with just the dirt areas. That's what I was looking for. That's why we couldn't see the layer. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. We're just layering these guys up. But we're making sure that we're subtracting all the layers that sit on top of other layers from each other. Okay, cool. So now we have this dirt here, and it's coming through, and we're applying it. So let's take a look at our visualization now. And let's go and set this to our dirt. There we go. So now we've got rock, dirt, and grass. Very cool. Okay, with that all set up, what we could do is start to develop a little bit better of a grass here. This is obviously not super cool. So what I'm going to do is drop down a blur, so a height field blur, and we can have it work on just the mask itself. So if we replace this layer right here, so we're going to say mask. Okay, so I'm just going to blur that a bit. And then what I want to do is I want to add some noise to it. So I'm going to say height field noise, so height field noise. Right there. Boom. And I'm going to apply that, and we're just going to subtract it from the current deal. So we need to subtract the mask, like so. And I'm going to say subtract. There we go. And let's just make sure that we are clamped here, because this guy is really adding quite a bit there. And so let's do a remap. There we go. Height field remap. And we're going to clamp it to 0 to 1, and we'll do that on the mask over here. There we go. And we'll take a look. Oh, and the amplitude's just way too high. Alright, then we got to move this all the way down, because I'm looking to get some like kind of splotchiness to the grass. Cool. That's what I'm actually looking for. So last step here is I want to go and drop down another remap here. It's a height field remap. And we're going to remap this guy so that we don't want all these really smooth gradients. I want to clamp this down to kind of like right in the middle, I would say. So if I go to this, I think you set this to mask, and we can go, we're going to clamp all this stuff. So you can see now, I can actually get some nice, cleaner, more grass-looking edges there. So that makes it feel a little bit more organic. You can go even farther with it, you know. Yeah, cool. All right, so let's pump that into this node right here that's creating our grass layer for us. And take a look over here. All right, we need to update this guy, obviously. So this final node right there, the remap, needs to go into the dirt. There we go. Very cool. So let's just move all of this down so we can stay organized and neat and clean. Cool. So that is that. So now we have dirt, grass, and rock. So I'll do one more layer for you guys, and just because I want to show you how to create your own flow fields inside of Houdini here to create your own erosion looks. Okay? Thanks so much. Alrighty, so I'm going to close out all the layer stuff by adding the erosion flows, alright? You always see those World Machine terrains that have really cool erosion looks to them. So I want to show you guys how to create your own flow fields without using all the erosion node layers that get created automatically. Let's create our own so we have more control over it. Alright, so let's go take a look. Okay, so what I want to do is make the terrain look a little more interesting by putting in the erosion lines. Okay, these are always those extra little polished features that makes these things look cool. So what I want to do, I'm going to pull off from the grass over here, and I'm going to drop down a flow field node. So height field, flow field. All right, I'm going to feed that in there, and it'll take a second for it to calculate because it's basically dropping rain over the whole thing. And voila, look at that. We get really cool erosion lines and everything for our entire terrain. I believe it runs a little faster than the erosion node. I find this to be way better, way more flexible, because you can go and change the rain density and it'll just increase even more over here, right? So you can really play around with a lot of this stuff. I'm going to pull it back just a little bit. All right. And what I want to do now is I want to add on the debris that we got from our slumping, okay? So let's do that. So I'm going to put in a height field copy layer, and I'm going to take the debris layer now as the source and send that to the mask. There we go. So there's our debris layer. So after that, I want to do a height field layer, okay, and layer these two together. So I want to add them this time. So we're going to do that and then just work on the mask, and we'll say add, like so. There we go. Just kind of fills it out. All right, we want to make sure that we clamp the minimum and maximum, and then let's do a remap so we have more control over the final look of this. While that's cool, I want to get rid of some of those gradients. That way we have nice solid masks for our textures. Okay, so to do that, let's start to mess around with some of these values. Again, I'm going to clamp minimum and maximum and work on the mask. Okay, and we'll start to just pull these guys back. Yeah, something like that. I don't want too much. I find that having too many of these erosion lines just makes it look weird, really. So do something like that, I think. That'll be good. Just like that. And I'm thinking I'm going to do that trick where we add a little bit of noise to this as well. So let's do the blur. All right, so height field blur. It is in my list. Cool. So let's blur this guy a little bit. And we want to work on the mask. There we go. And I don't want to blur it too much. There we go. Cool. And then I'm going to do a noise. So height field noise. And again, we want to work on the mask. Like so. I'm going to wire that guy in and turn that on. And I want to do a subtract instead. Put my amplitude to 1. And make this really tiny. Like so. This will just help break it up so it doesn't feel so computer generated. Okay, and then finally we need another remap to kind of clamp it in there. Just make it solid. So clamp minimum, clamp maximum. We're going to work on the mask and adjust our values. Something more like that. Yeah, I think that'll be cool. Maybe we add a little bit more noise, so add some more amplitude here. We'll just kind of break it up even more. Maybe make this even smaller. Let's go down to like 8. Yeah, it's looking cool. So now it feels like, there were streams and stuff. Let's maybe do 1.5. And just adjust this even more. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So it feels nice and natural. All right, so what I want to do now is I need to subtract all of that from all of our layers, from our rock, our grass. So what I'm going to do is I am going to do a copy layer over here. Okay, so I'm going to do another copy layer. Alrighty, and this one is going to take this current mask that we see over here, and we're going to put it into rock, and we're going to put it into a grass layer, and we're going to put it into a dirt layer. Alright, that way we can come over here, drop down a height field layer node, and this time subtract it. Alright, so let's do that. Let's go and do a subtract, and let's work on the rock, the dirt, and the grass. Alrighty. So let's feed that into here, and let's take a look. So I want to visualize that, see if we subtracted successfully. Oh, and we also need to make sure to come in here and clamp that down. And let's take a look. And there we go. So now we can control the debris color with something like this. You know, so we can get a different color over here. I always kind of like to make this a little more reddish. Maybe a little bit less. There we go. Something like that. So you can go through and adjust all your layers even more. I'll probably go and mess with it a little bit more too, but that's the general process, right? So to close it out, all we need to do is create another copy layer node, right? Because we haven't actually created that dirt layer, that debris layer. So I'm going to say mask goes to debris. All right, so now we have our debris. And what I want to do is add that to the list here. So let's do a copy layer over here. And I'm going to take whatever the current mask is and call it debris. And then we'll move this guy down. We need to do another height field layer. All right, so there we go. And now I can go and replace just the debris layer. Like that. So now we can go and check that again. It's always good to verify with this visualizer. So let's say I pull this back to black, just so we can verify this. And I set the grass to debris. And there we go. Very cool. Okay, so I'm going to leave you guys there. We now have all of our terrain layers all set up. All right, let's just make sure we're nice and clean actually first. So debris, grass, rock, dirt, height, and mask. Everything we need. So 4 layers, a mask, and a height. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to close it out there, and we're going to keep moving forward in the next lecture. All right, so now that we've got all of our layers hooked up, what we need to do is we need to attach certain attributes to each one of those layers. This way, the Houdini engine knows how to hook up textures, all right, and normal maps, and the sizes of all those textures. All right, so let's take a look at those in Houdini. Okay, so I went ahead and I just adjusted my debris a little bit more. You know, it's kind of cool. Yeah, turned out pretty cool. It needs a little bit more loving, or maybe another layer on top of it, just to kind of break it up even more. So this is great for demonstration purposes. So what we need to do is we need to add some attributes to this. All right, and what I'm going to do is drop down an attribute create node. Alrighty, and what I'm going to do is call this the rock layer adders. All right, just so I know that that's where all the rock layer adder attributes go. Okay, and so on this attribute create node, I want to come up to the group, and we want to work on the rock layer. All right, so select the rock layer right there. It'll just put in the appropriate expression for you. And what I want to do is I want to first apply the proper texture to this. Okay, so I'm going to type out an attribute name. All right, and I'll point it out in the documentation here in just a bit. But we're going to type out unity underscore HF underscore texture underscore diffuse. Okay, and this needs to be on the primitive class type, and it needs to be a type of string, because what we need to do is we need to put in a path to a texture that exists inside of Unity. So let me jump over to Unity here really quick, And I've gone ahead and imported some textures. All right, and so I have these rock textures, and I do have some textures that I'm going to use, but these came out of Substance Source, so I can't just redistribute them. But I have included some grids that are colored, in the same vein as those colors from the textures. And so what I'm going to do is just copy this rock grid path, go back to Houdini over here, and just paste it into there. All right. And so what I want to do is get that set up for all the other layers. So I'm just going to copy this guy, and I'm going to name this our dirt. Okay, so we say dirt, and we don't want to work on the rock. We want to work on the dirt layer. All right, and then let's go back to Unity, and let's get our dirt grid. So I have this darker grid I'm going to use for this, and let's replace it. All right, and then we'll do the grass. Cool, so let's go and get rid of that and call this the grass layer. And again, we want to change the layer that we want to work on to grass. And then we need to change the path. So let's go back to Unity, go to grass, and let's get our grass grid. Alrighty, so we copy that, and go back to Houdini. And there you go. Now you can expose these values too to the HDA itself. That way you can change them inside the editor. I'm just getting everything in place and started. It's always good to have some default textures to start with. Okay, so we need a final attribute create node, and this one is going to work on our debris. All right, so let's do debris. And for the path to the texture, I'm just going to use this lighter grid over here. So let me make sure I click that properly. There we go. Go back to Houdini over here and paste it in place. And then put that into the final dealio. So if we were to look at let's select this final terrain node here, and we go over to our primitives. Oh, I need to unpin this. All right, so if we go over there, you can see that we have our textures attached to these different layers. And if I come down to the Unity material node, we have a material set on the height. All right, so those are all the setup so far. Very cool. All right, so with that, we are good to go. So let's do a test inside of Unity. All right, so I'm going to save the node there. And let's jump back into Unity and get this guy overwritten. So let's override the old one with the new one. And let's do a rebuild and see how it's coming along. Might take a little bit for it to rebuild this time because we have all the erosion stuff in there and masking and stuff. So give it a second. And there we go. We now have our terrain layers all hooked up. All right, so that shows you how to get the materials and textures all hooked up. So one thing I want to do next is show you guys how to control the size of your textures on a per layer basis. All right, so I'm going to turn off our grid now since we have a terrain in here. And this is coming along nicely. All right, we're starting to build up a really cool looking terrain over here. All righty. So I'm going to close out the lecture there and move on to the next. Okay, so now that we've got our textures hooked up, let's take a look at how we can control the size of all of our textures, so the tiling size. Okay, so let's jump back into Houdini. Alrighty, so I just want to add a couple more, or one more attribute to each one of the layers. So let's go into the rock attribute first, and what we can do is we can add multiple attributes, and this is what I tend to do for terrains. Alrighty, and so what I want to do is hit this plus button right here. Okay, and we want to say Unity underscore HF tile underscore size. And this allows us to control the size of that. So let's take a look at the documentation. So if we come into the Unity documentation, now this is Unity specific. All right, the landscapes and the layers and textures for Unreal get all hooked up inside of the material. All right, and so and for Unity, though, we need to do this. So what I'm looking at is this Unity HF tile size. And it's a float array, and it needs to be a float of size 2. Okay? And so I'm going to go back to Houdini here, and I need to make it a primitive type. All right, so let's take a look at the documentation again. Yep, so they're all primitive classes. And I need to make it a float, which is fine, size of 2. And we're going to set the value to, I'm going to say 20 and 20. How about that? Okay. And so let's just copy that now, and let's add it to all the other layers. So I'm going to make another attribute. I'm going to name it Unity HF tile size. Put it on the primitive class. It's of type float, but needs to be a size of 2. And the value is 20 and 20. And my tab is not working. There we go. 20. There we go. All right, let's do it for the grass. So add one more attribute. Unity HF tile size. Put it on the primitive class. Float of size 2. And 20 and 20 for the size. Let's just our starting size. All right, we'll add it over here. Set it up the same. And there we go. Cool. All right, so what I'm going to do is save that now. So I'm going to save the node type. And we are going to go back into Unity, open our folders again. And let's actually copy this over that. Cool. And we will do a rebuild. And anytime we rebuild, it's going to redo that erosion. So for me, currently, it's taking about 30 seconds to rebuild. So I'm going to let it keep going, and it'll be back here, I think, about 15 more seconds. And there we go. So now we have really large textures because we set our tile size to 20 and 20. So you're going to want to expose those values. All right, and I'm going to do that too. What I want to do is actually modify the terrain a little bit first, and I think in the next lecture we're going to do that, and then I'll promote some parameters. That way we have stuff to play around with inside here. Currently we only have the terrain size and the erosion time. Okay, so I want a lot more features. I also want to be able to switch on and off that erosion stuff. So let's do that in the next lecture. Howdy guys. Okay, I want to go and tweak the terrain just a little bit, and then we need to go and add a couple parameters to this just so we have a little bit more control over some of the aspects of our terrain. Okay, so let's go take a look. Alright, so one thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the terrain doesn't really dip below the grid over here. So, and I'm really just doing this as a preference type of thing. Most of my terrain is going to be additive. Now, you might not want that, so you can leave it however you want. For this particular course, I'd recommend keeping it at 0. We're not going to get too much into, having terrains go over these areas that are below. I'm trying to keep just a flat racetrack just for, beginners and intermediates, so we can focus on all these core concepts with the Houdini engine. I will cover a little bit more, and I'll add, some more sections after the release of the course to show you guys how to do more kind of like mountain type of rally type of tracks, that go from start to end. Currently, we just have a loop, right? We just need to make another tool that does a start to end type of thing. Anyways, let's get back to our tweak. So in the noise node up here, what I'm going to do is just put it on maximum. All right, so I'm just going to keep that on maximum there. We'll take a look now. Very cool. That's what I'm looking for. And then what I want to do is I want to create another height field that's, the same size. It's hooked up to the same deal. But for this one, I'm going to create a smaller noise. So let's drop down another height field noise, like so. And I want to create something that's really tiny, really small, so maybe like 10 for the amplitude, just to give ourselves kind of this lowlands type of area. All right, maybe 15 will do pretty good, these little tiny mountains. Maybe make it a little bit bigger, like so, yeah. All right, and then I want to do a layer, so let's do a layer, height field layer. And let's wire this guy into there, because I want to blend these two together based off their maximum heights. All right, so I'm going to select the height field layer now, and we're just going to work on the height for this. And I'm going to go and say maximum. Look at that. We now get something that's kind of cool for terrain. We have these big mountains and these lowland areas right over here. Okay, so this is going to work out pretty well for our particular terrain needs. Maybe make the element size on these mountains a little bit bigger, or smaller, sorry, I should say. Maybe I'll pull them down so they're not so high. Yeah, something like that. I think it's going to be cool. We just need mountains that kind of surround our track over here. And I also kind of want to move this. Now you can promote all these parameters as well and adjust this. Alrighty, so let's move this a little bit faster this way. A little bit more in the X. Kind of like that. I'm just looking for a good spot for the track to be in the center. Yeah. I'm going to leave it like that, I think. Maybe bring it down to 200. That'll be cool. A little more terrain-like, a little more realistic. Alright, so I'm going to take the result of that and pump that into my erosion node. And now we just need to come to the erosion node and say reset simulation. That way we reprocess everything in here. Alright, let's go take a look at what we got. Maybe we increase the erosion a little bit more. Let's take a look at our visualizer. Yeah, it's not too bad. A little more realistic, so we have more grass down here in the lowlands. Pretty cool. Let's add some more erosion. Let's not freeze at frame 5. And we'll use this time shift, so let's go up here and actually use our parameter. Let's do 10. See what happens. See what this all looks like. So it's going to take longer, you know, but you get something that looks a little bit cooler. So I highly recommend, you know, once you guys are settled with your terrains, you can go and do this type of stuff. And let's resend that. Alright, so there we go. Not too shabby. You know, you got to spend quite a bit of time getting the final look for your terrain. Or if you're importing something from, let's say, Gaia or World Machine, you can totally do that too with a height field file. So if you type out file, there's a height field file. So you could always import it and just import it inside of Unity. Alright, so let me know if you guys want to see that. I can make an extra section around importing stuff. Alright, so with that, I'm just going to set that guy as my final output. And I'm going to right click here and say Save Node. And let's go back in Unity and test it one more time. Alright, so I'm going to copy the new one over the old one. Come into Unity here. Alright, now we're going to hit rebuild. And I'm going to wait for about 30 seconds, well maybe a little bit more because I increased the erosion time. So maybe about 45 seconds. I'll be right back. Alright, so here we are. And we have a nice new landscape. Look at that. And we're now getting closer to our final terrain here. And it's nicely flattened, or not necessarily snapped or anything like that, but now we've got it closer to the track, so everything's starting to come together quite well. So the last thing I want to do is I want to create some parameters for me to adjust the size of the texture. So let's go back to Houdini really quick here. And I'm going to open up the type properties for the tool and make another folder over here. Alright, and again I'm going to make it collapsible, just my preference. I'm going to call this textures. And I'm going to create a float value. So I'm going to say float, and I'm going to call this tile size. Tile size. Like so. Hit apply. Alright, and then hit accept. And then let's go up to the top of our HDA and just copy it so we can paste it really quickly. Alright, so inside of our textures now, I want to copy this guy. So copy parameters. Go back in here. And for all of our layers, I'm just going to hook it up. We're just going to keep it square too. I'm just pasting relative references into here. Alrighty. Very cool. Cool. Alright, so let's save our HDA. Go back into Unity and test that out. So one more time. Going to re-import it. Go back to Unity over here, let it import. We're going to select our HDA. And we're going to hit Rebuild Asset. Alright, and there we go. So you can see that our new textures parameter turned out fine. And it's because our default is set to 0. Let me go back into the type properties here. so you guys can see. I'm going to default it to 10, I think. That's what I'm going to do. So I'll hit apply and accept, and we'll save this guy. All right, so let's go test it out. Let me just set it to 10 here. It's out of Unity, and let it roll through. Now, this is why we would want a switch for the erosion. It'll just speed things up. I think I might, at some point here, do another like polish pass for you guys as another section, just to show you all the other stuff that we can do with these to make it really performant in the engine here. That way you can, design your terrains a little bit better than just relying on noises, and also switching on and off certain systems that are a little bit heavier. All right, but for now, this is working just fine for us. Okay, so I'm going to close out the lecture there, and in the next, I'm going to show how to set up all the Unreal landscape material stuff. Okay, thanks so much. All right, so for everyone using Unreal, we are going to jump into Unreal, test out our terrain. I'm going to show you a couple things that I tweaked, just so you guys can see how I did everything. And we're going to set up the landscape material, so you guys can see how to do that. All right, I think it rounds it out nicely. So let's jump back into Houdini first, and then Unreal. Okay, let's take a look at the graph here really quick. So the one thing that I changed is I created this engine switch right here, okay? So I literally just dropped down a switch node, like so, and I put in for the first input the Unity material, and for the second input, I put in the Unreal material, all right? Because Unreal doesn't need all these attributes attached to it. Better to keep all those attributes off the layers so we don't cause any problems. Not that I've ever really seen any problems when those are on there in Unreal, but just to be safe, And so then what I did is I promoted it to a parameter onto the HDA up here, and I turned it into a toggle. And for the label, I just put Unreal, question mark, so that way when it's on, we're in Unreal. And if it's off, we're inside of Unity. So you can use the same tool for both. Pretty cool. I like to do that, reuse my work. All right, so that is that. So what I did is I went ahead and I already imported it into Unreal here. So I have the terrain creator right here. I also went through and imported all the texture grids that I made for you guys, so you guys have something to test with. All right. So let's go in and actually put it into the scene here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is drag and drop this guy into the scene. And because this has the erosion node on it, it's going to take a little bit. So you can see it's going to roll through the cook here and give you a bunch of information about what's happening. All right, and so what's happening right now is it's actually doing all the erosion. You can see the information, what node's being currently processed. And it's that height field erode node. That one takes the longest. Okay, so like I said before, you can always put a switch in there to turn off erosion and turn it back on. That way you can work faster. All right. And obviously, if you're using a height field or a height map from Gaia or World Machine, you would literally just import the texture, the height map. All right. And I will make an actual extra section about importing the height maps. Once we get past the majority of the course, it'll be like a bonus section, basically. Because it's important. I know a lot of the game studios use an external application to generate their height maps. Boom! Now we have a terrain. How's about them apples? Really cool. So let's center it up in the world now. All right. And we want to come in here, and we want to go and turn on Unreal. It'll most likely have to cook again. So for your particular, if you're just sticking with Unreal, then you could just have it on by default, obviously. But if you are in a situation where you have to use Unity's Houdini engine and Unreal's Houdini engine, that's a way to do it. So I'm going to let this finish cooking and be right back. All right, there we go. Everything's all back, and we are now shifted over to Unreal over here. So if we go to our terrain creator, we're switched over to Unreal. Perfect. And what I want to do is I want to come in here and do a little bit of inspecting here, just to see what's going on. All right, so by default, we have our height map, which is all set up for us. And if we go to the paint, we can actually see all of our layers. And the Houdini engine's gone and created all the layer info assets that need to be created for terrain. So we don't have to do that, which is great. All right, when we bake it out, it'll basically create a baked version of all these for us to use. So with that, all we need to do now is create the material. So let's go into our materials folder here. And I'm going to create a new material like so. And this is going to be called our default landscape master material, or MM for short. All right, and let's pop this guy open here. Cool. I'm going to go and dock this guy up here, and let's start creating the node. So the first thing that we need to do is create a layer, a landscape layer node. So we need the landscape layer blend. All right, and yeah, that's what we're going to stick with. So what we need to do is come into our array elements and start adding some elements here. Okay, we need to name them appropriately, so I'm going to name this one rock. So it's rock right there, and you can see it's starting to add to the list over here. Okay, and we'll leave all the other things on by default. All right, so let's collapse that. Let's go and create another member. Let's actually create all three. Oh, four is what we have. Okay, so the next one's going to be our dirt. All right, and our next one is going to be our grass, like so. And then finally we have our debris. Cool. All right, so now we have all of our layers. Let's get our landscape coordinates. All right, so we have something to modify in terms of size of our textures. Alrighty, so the other thing I want to do is set up a couple of constants here. So for metallic, we don't need any metallic. Our specularity, we'll keep it at 0.5. So we'll do 0.5. And then our roughness, we'll just put at 0.5 too. We'll just start it at 0.5. All right, cool. And this layer blend is going to pump into this base color. This is how it's going to blend together all the textures. All right. So the next thing that we need to do is pull in some textures. So let's go get our rock texture first. So let's get rock. I'm going to select it. And in here, with it selected in the content browser, I can hold down T and click, and it'll create a texture sample for me. All right, and it'll be automatically hooked up to that rock texture. So now all I need to do is pump in the UVs from our landscape chords node and pump out the RGB to the layer rock. And there we go. All right, so now we've got our first texture sample. Let's put in the dirt here. So let's go get the dirt. I'm going to use this darker one first. And again, hit T on the keyboard. Pump in your UVs and our dirt. Very cool. And we need to go and get our grass. So it's pretty easy. Obviously, this is, the bare bones landscape material, but it gets the foundation in place. And this is basically how I start all these out. And then you go and add on all the different effects and distances and fancy displacements and stuff like that. All right, so let's go and get our dirt 2 and put that in for the debris. Cool. So this goes into our debris. And with all that set up, all right, there's our landscape material. And I'll cover how to sample the landscape layers as well so we can scatter stuff on it, but we'll do that here in just a little bit, another section. And I'm going to hit apply and then save. All right, so with that, we can now go get our material. And if we go, let's get back to our place mode here, and let's select the landscape. And we can actually test this out really quickly by just overriding this landscape material. Currently, it's got the default. So if I just drag and drop this into there, it's going to go and compile the shaders. Give it a moment here. I'll be right back when it's done. And there we go. Perfect. Basically the same exact result as Unity. All right, so instead of manually assigning this material, which is totally valid, but when you go and actually recook this or change any parameter, it's going to get rid of the manual assignment right there. All right. So what we need to do is right-click on this and say Create Material Instance, and this is going to be our Mick. There we go, for material instance. Alrighty, and we're going to save that, and I'm going to copy that reference. I'm going to go back into Houdini, and inside of our Unreal material now that we have that material, I can just go and paste it like so. And there we go. Now it'll automatically hook up every single time. Okay, and that is how we go about getting all this stuff set up. Very cool. So that's just the bare bones setup, but hopefully you got to see the entire process from start to finish of creating the terrain with Houdini Engine. All right, we'll make this all pretty and stuff here pretty soon. Get things scattered on it. I'll probably start using some of my own textures in here, which I can't actually distribute because I get them all from Substance Source for the most part. All right, so we're on our way. We almost have a level going. Cool. All right, so I'm going to leave you guys there. Definitely let me know if you have any questions, and I'll respond as fast as I can. Thanks so much. Okay, so let's do a quick review of all the concepts that we learned throughout this section. So we learned how to build terrains with Houdini Highfields from a basic standpoint. All right, we got a nice little terrain up and running. We learned how to allow for changes in the H engine by promoting parameters and hooking up the terrain sizes and stuff like that. All right, we learned how to upgrade the Houdini engine for Unity because it was time, and there were lots of changes in the last couple of weeks, so it really helped out with our terrain stuff because it's taking advantage of Unity 2019's new terrain features, layers, and stuff like that. All right, and then we learned how to create layers for texturing using all the masking techniques and appropriate subtraction and normalizing. That way we get nice clean layers out of Houdini. And we learned how to hook up a Unity material. And then finally we took a look at how to create the landscape material inside of Unreal. Alright, so hopefully all that made sense and you're excited to go and build your own new terrains and stuff like that. So let me know if you have any questions and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Let's move on to the next section. Howdy guys. Okay, so in this section what we're going to do is we're going to have some fun and actually learn about a couple ways that we can go about designing our terrains. Alright, using noises and stuff is fine and stuff, but I really like to get in there and decide where my mountains go and then apply some noise to that and then erode that, right? It's just more artistic control. So let's do a quick review of all the topics we are going to cover in this section. So we are going to first take a look at how to flatten the terrain around the track area, because we need to clear everything out around the track. We don't want it to overlap the track at all. And so we need to learn ways to control that nice and easily. And then we're going to take a look at creating mountain stamps. Now, I like doing this because it allows me to determine where I actually have mountains on my terrain, and I can do that. Alright, so these mountain stamps allow us to place mountains manually, and then we can snap the terrain to the mountains. Alright, and then we're going to walk through how to work with mountain stamps in both Unity and in Unreal. And we're going to also learn about how to export geometry with the Houdini engine. It's super cool. You can export to OBJ, you can export to the BTO file format, which is native to Houdini. And if you have an Indie or above license, you can export to FBX as well, directly from within your game engine. Now, I know you can do that in Unreal already, but this is great for Unity. Alright, and we're also going to take a look at snapping terrain to the mountain stamps that we place. So with that, let's get started and start polishing up our terrain. Howdy guys. Okay, so in this lecture what we're going to do is set up our terrain HDA so that we're importing the track geometry. Because what I want to do is I want to clear out the terrain that's surrounding the track area. Okay, so let's jump back into Houdini and take a look at how to do that. Alright, so here we are inside of Unreal, and I've gone ahead and just tweaked the settings on the terrain a little bit more. You have access to the HDA. So you can pop it open and take a look at some of the tweaks. Really, I just did a lot of tweaks in the actual parameters here. So I set it to 1025, and which actually in Unreal will actually extend the edges a little bit. You can see over here if I move really fast. There we go. Because I'm using Unity's measurements, what happens is it will automatically, the Houdini engine will automatically add in the extra pixels it needs, but you'll get this effect. So, you know, for the course itself, this will work just fine because we're going to focus on the center of the terrain. But if you are using Unreal, use the Unreal units that we discussed in the last section. Okay. So, I just wanted to show this, but basically the whole idea of this section is I want a little bit more control over my terrain. Using the noises is great and everything. It gives you a nice rough pass, but when it really comes to designing these landscapes for games, you really want a lot of control, and level designers want lots of control. Usually, even with the procedural tools I've made for different game teams, even after the fact of baking out the landscape and using all the tools, they'll still go in and, you know, sculpt it a little bit and paint it a little bit. So these tools get you basically, I would say, 85 to 90% of the way there, and then let the artist do the last 10%, which is what they love to do. All right, just trying to remove as much manual work. So in this lecture, we're going to focus on clearing out the terrain so it's nice and snug against the track. Okay, so let's jump back into Houdini and get it all set up. Okay, so here is our current setup for our Terrain Creator HDA. So we have all these geometry nodes inside of that subnet there. I actually want to go and import or let the level designer, whoever is using this HDA, to import the track geometry. So the way I do it when I'm setting up an HDA like this, a larger HDA, or the compound HDA that I like to call them, I will drop in another geometry node, and this will be the import track geometry node. All right, so you can see how I can just do different tasks in each of these different geometry nodes. And I really like this because it keeps it nice and organized and separated, and when they come into Unity and Unreal, they come in as separate objects, all right, instead of one combined object. Okay, so I'm going to jump into this import track and drop down an object merge node. All right, and this is going to be called get track, like so. And we want to set this so we import into this object, and we'll leave this like that for now. And I'm just going to drop down a null node here. We're really not going to do much with this. This is basically the setup here. We're going to say out track geo, or there you go, geo. Okay, so what I want to do now is get the HDA hooked up so that we are importing our geometry. So I'm going to go and open up the type properties by right-clicking on this guy right there. And what I'm going to do is create another folder up here. All right, and I'm going to call this objects for this guy. So we'll call them import objects. How about like that? Okay. And again, I'm going to make it collapsible. Now, I highly recommend playing around with the different setups and just you know, saving out your HDA and re-importing the HDA into Unity or Unreal. It's very much a preference thing. Okay. So let's go and select our object merge node here. And what I'm going to do is drag and drop that into there. And we'll call this the track or input track, like so. So input track, very cool. And we'll hit apply, and that should be good for now. And accept, because now what we can do is go up to the top level here, and let's assign our track, our current track creator tool to it, so we can start to test here within inside of Unity. All right, so I'm going to select my terrain creator there, and I'm going to just drag and drop that track creator into there. Cool. So now if we come into our import track, we are now importing the track. Super cool. And we have the curve too. All right, so we've got lots of information to work with. Okay, so what I'm going to do is set up a circle because I want to basically fit this little tiny circle here, which also needs to be on the ZX plane. I want to fit this guy to the size of the current track. I want to basically surround the entire track. Okay, and to do that, we are going to utilize some of our bounding box functions. So let me template this just so we can see this in action. Okay, so I'm going to select the circle here, and for the radius, I want to get the size in X, the maximum size in X of the track. Okay, so we're going to say BB box, and we want to get the information from the out track geo node, and I want to get the DX size. Like so. Look at that. It's actually fitting it. And because it's the radius, it's a little bit bigger. or it's actually quite a bit bigger. You can always come in here and say times 0.5 and you'll get an exact match. Maybe we make a slider value for this. So let's maybe say 0.25. All right, 0.75. Yeah, let's stick with that. All right, so let's copy this expression now, and let's get the z size. So we basically fit it to our track. So I'm going to say z size. Look at that. We're now completely fit to our track. Now, the track might not actually be at world center, okay, or world 0. So we need to go and find the center of our track so we can fit this circle around it perfectly. So to do that, I'm going to utilize the centroid function. All right, and we're going to get, again, the data from the outTrack geo node. All right, and we are going to get the dx for the x position. Cool. And in this case, because this track is at world center or world 0, it's not moving anywhere. So trust me, this works. All right, so now we have it centered up in the x and z. We want to make sure that the circle is sitting just below the track. All right, to do that, we're going to use the bbbox function again, because it has another argument that we can use, so outTrack geo, called the dy_min. All right, that's literally just like setting it to the very bottom, most bottom portion of the track. All right, so that'll fit it perfectly. Cool. So let's go and drop a null down like so, and I'm going to call this my out track footprint. All right. Now you might be wondering to yourself, why don't you just use the track geometry by itself to flatten the terrain? And you know what? You totally can. All right. It really comes down to preference. The reason why I'm doing this is because I have found throughout experience that usually around areas like this track here, the level designers are really going to want to go in and fine-tune the look of it. So I'm going to clear it all out, and I'm going to show you guys throughout this section how we can create smaller tools to really allow a level designer to go and sculpt and place larger elements in that area by hand, all right? But still feeding it into our terrain system, and the terrain system turns that into mountains or little tiny hills and stuff, okay? So I'm going to show you guys all that. That's why I'm doing it this way. Okay, cool. So let's go and set this guy to polygon, all right? And you'll notice that we need to reverse it because the one side is darker than the other, so that means this guy is pointing downwards. And so I'm going to reverse it. Cool. And I'm doing that for a reason, because I actually want to display this mesh inside of Unity and Unreal. All right. And so I want to be able to actually see it. And so let's go and add a couple more divisions to this guy. And what I want to do is kind of rough up the edges. All right. So this is a nice little trick that I've been using a lot lately. So what I'll do is I'll create a point expression node. Okay. And inside of this point expression node, I'm going to modify the normals. So let's take a look at our current normals here. They're all currently pointing straight up in Y. All right. What I want to do is I want to get the, I think they had it, yeah, spherify N. What that does is it points these guys outward from the center of the object. And because this is a circle, this is going to work out perfect. But I also want to normalize this, so I need to add a little bit in there. So you notice they're really long, and that's just the actual length from the center to the point. Okay? There we go. So now we've got normalized normals. Always a good idea to normalize those guys. With that done, we can go and create a mountain node. Let's do this. So mountain. And I can go and increase the height here. And you'll notice that it'll break it up. Right? So we don't have like a perfect imprint of a circle in our terrain. Right? We just want to go and break this up a little bit. We can change the size over here and make it really, really noisy. All right. These are values that we probably should promote. So let's actually open up our type properties here. And I'm going to make another folder called footprints. Or we'll call this track footprint. Like so. Cool. And let's go and assign the height and the element size for now. Okay, you can promote as much of these sliders and parameters as you want. All right, so I'm going to leave them at their defaults for now, just the way they're set up already. And that should be good, so I'm going to hit accept. So now we've got some control that we can change inside of the Houdini engine. All right, with that, I am going to do one more thing here. Okay, so I want the ability to display this or not. All right, I want to give the level designer some sort of way to visualize this particular mesh inside of their terrain, inside of the engine, right? Because you want them to be able to adjust it visually. All right, so to do that, what I'm going to do is I am going to create a switch node. All right, and I'm going to drop down a switch node like so, and I'm going to create a null node over here. And then basically this is going to be no viz. All right, that's usually what I call it, because I want them to be able to switch on and off this geometry. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this guy over here. This is the node we're going to grab when we pull it into our terrain to flatten it over here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is create another null node, and this is just going to be out viz. All right, so now we can switch between whether we see it or not, like so. And let's just turn off the template. So there we go. And one thing I want to do with this is I want to add some color. So I'm going to create a color for this, like so. And I usually make these kind of like an orangish color, and I don't know why. You can make it any color you want. I've just kind of gone with this orangish color. Every once in a while I'll do like a green, because it really comes down to whatever mood I'm in. All right, and then I'm going to drop down a attribute wrangle node. All right, because what I want to do is adjust the alpha value of this. So to do that, this is a built-in variable that we can set inside of Houdini. So you say at capital A alpha is equal to 0.5. Let's just start there. And you'll notice that we can now see through it. All right, it's kind of hard to see with the grid. All right, and what I'm going to do now is get this new functionality all set up over here. So let's go and open up our type properties and promote our switch. And I'm going to put that in the track footprint. And for the switch, I'm going to say footviz. And we're going to say show footprint, question mark, like so. All right, I'm going to turn it over to a toggle. And let's enable it by default. So there we go. Cool. So we want it on by default. And hit accept. Very cool. All right. So we'll set this guy as the actual geometry that will get exported out into Houdini Engine. And we can use all this data over here, all these other nodes, these null nodes, to work with inside of our network. Awesome. So let's save our node type here. Cool. And let's go into Unreal, since I have it open. Sorry, Unity guys. I'm going to do it in Unreal now. So let's go and re-import this guy. All right. And I'm going to save it. And then what we can do is we can actually rebuild all the instances that exist in this particular scene by coming up here, right-clicking on the actual HDA and say rebuild all instances. And that saves you time from actually having to go and select it in the outliner, going down to the details panel, and having to hit rebuild. Okay, so once this is done cooking, with any luck, we'll have a circle surrounding our track with a little bit of noise on it. We'll have a couple new parameters over here that we can adjust. These terrain HDAs get quite large, the amount of parameters. So you really need to, work back and forth with your level design team and make sure that, you're not overwhelming the amount of parameters that you have, because you could get lost in tweaking things. And speed is the key, and we're trying to automate things with the Houdini engine. So, you still have to design this stuff. All right, so try to make it as easy as possible. Don't just throw everything in there. That's what I say. I mean, honestly, I used to do that when I first started out with the Houdini engine. I was just like, I just want all of Houdini in here. And you really start to figure out what is important and what isn't. Okay, so we finally finished cooking there. Very cool. So what we're going to have over here might actually be available, but we are setting the circle to the size of the track, and we haven't assigned the track yet. So let's go and do that. All right, so let's go and set this guy to an asset input, and let's select our basic track creator from it. And look at that. We actually have our circle surrounding it. And if we were to come in here and down into the track footprint, we can change the the size of all these guys, so like the element size and stuff of all these things. Oops, selected the terrain instead there. All right, you can change the height, or we can disable that footprint. All right, so if the level designer ever wants to see where that footprint is actually placed, you can just turn it back on, and there you go. And because it's sitting in its own geometry node, it's working independently of all the erosion and that stuff. It's not firing off that network, right? So it doesn't have to cook that network. All right, so good bit of efficiency tips right there. Very cool. Okay, so I'm going to close out the lecture there. This works the same exact way inside of Unity. There's no specific game engine stuff with what we just did. Okay, and so we're going to move on, and I'm actually going to flatten the terrain now. All right, so let's take a look at how we can use that geometry now that we created that surrounds the track to flatten the terrain. All right, so let's go and get this geometry that's coming out right here. All right, let's get that geometry over into our terrain now. So I'm going to click up and out. So now we're at this level inside of our subnet. And we can see all of our components in our compound HDA here. And what I want to do is import our track footprint. And we want to do a bunch of stuff right before we send it into the erosion here. So first things first, let's drop down an object merge node, and we're going to say, we're going to call this get track, like so. And we're going to import it into this object. And what I want to do is jump up and out of this node. All right, so now I'm at the top there inside of that subnet. And I want to go and find that import track geometry node. And I want to get its out track footprint output. All right, so if we were to click on this guy now, we are now importing that footprint into our terrain. So let's go and drop down a height field project node. That's all we're doing here. Okay, and this height field project node allows us to project height fields against geometry. All right, so you can see here that we are starting to move it up, but currently it's set to a maximum. All right, and that ray distance is about 1,000 meters, so it's going to fire a ray up 1,000 meters and see if it hits anything. Okay, but we need to do it in the other direction as well. So this is our max, all right, and this is going to be our min. So we can do max project and our minimum projection, because we want to do both sides just to make sure. Min projection. All right, so let's just set this guy to a minimum. And look at that. We have flattened it all out perfectly. Now, usually when we do stuff like this, you're going to get these, long stretching polygons or height values in your height fields, okay? And so what I'm going to do, or what I usually do, is drop down a blur or a mask from object. That's what I'm looking for. So mask from object or by object. And I'm going to feed that result in there. And again, I'm going to take my track footprint and pull it in there. So I held down the Alt key on the keyboard and just clicked once, and that gives me a nice little line. You can do it up here too, just to make it nice and clean. Cool. All right, so now we've got a mask where our footprint is. So let's go and expand that. All right, so let's expand it. And height field mask expand. There we go. Let's expand it just a little bit because we want to overlap the area where it's stretching those polygons. So we're going to pull it out just a bit. And then what I want to do is blur that just a little bit, just kind of soften it up. All right. And we want to actually work on mask. There we go. Cool. So let's move all of that up. There we go. And again, to move the whole network up from a single node, just hold down Shift and select the bottom node, and it'll move everything up. Okay, cool. So then let's go and blur the height. So let's do a height field blur and pass this in for the mask, the area where we want to blur. And there we go. We get rid of those edges. Now, you can put this at like 2 or 3. You don't need to go super. It's really up to you, right? Completely aesthetic. Okay, cool. So now we've got a nice blur. I'm going to do a mask clear because we don't need that mask anymore. We now have our footprint flattening the terrain. All right, cool. So let's pass all that into the height field erode and move this guy over here. And there we go. Look at that. This is really coming together now. Okay, Cool. So let's turn on our final output here. Get all this guy going. So it's going to process the erosion again. And if it didn't, or if it doesn't change, just hit the reset simulation on the erode node. Cool. So you can see it didn't actually give us the final geometry, which means we need to go to the erode node and hit reset simulation so it reprocesses it, because this time shift is overriding this. And so every once in a while you're going to have to hit reset simulation, which this button has also been promoted to the HDA, so you can do it within the engine. There we go. So now you can see we have our flattened area. How cool is that? Okay, so let's go and save that. So I'm going to say save node. All right, everything should be set up appropriately. Very cool. And yep, we're good to go. So let's jump back into Unreal and give this a test. All right, so I'm going to just save this. We're going to re-import it, and then we're going to rebuild all instances and let it do its thing. All right, so looks like we were successful. Looks like we lost some of our vertex colors there on our footprint, and I'll take a look at that later, but let's turn it off for now and just take a look at our results here. And it looks like got a little bit of overlap, from the erosion, but the footprint is still sticking around, and I'm wondering if that is because, let's go take a look here. Let's go into here. And that's why I left this guy on. So let's just turn that guy on. All right, so we'll do a save node type and go back to Unreal, and we will re-import that and do another rebuild really quick. All right, there we go. We did it. We are now flattening out the terrain around our track using that footprint. Everything is perfect too. How cool is that? Those guys are floating a little bit there. It's odd. I'll get it going. You'll also notice that we're getting a little bit of the erosion starting to come in on the track there. And that's just because we need to also do another min-max project after the erosion. Okay, so you just do the same setup. Just do it after the erosion node. Just make sure you blur it, maybe distort it a little bit so it doesn't look like it's so computer generated. All right, so we are on our way. We now have our terrain snapped to our track, or vice versa. All right, so let's keep moving forward. All right, so now that we've seen all this working in Unreal, let's take a couple minutes here and do a quick Unity test just to make sure everything is working nicely. Okay, so I have gone and imported the HDA already, so I overrode it, the terrain creator, and I've rebuilt it already. But what I haven't done yet is assign the track. So let's do that now. What I'm going to do is come over to the asset parameters. You can see all of our new UI here. This is why I like the collapsibles, here in Unity at least. For Unreal, I should mention that I do use the tabs more often because I don't like scrolling up and down the details panel. But that's just kind of my preference. So I'm going to come over here and change this over to HDA. And once it switches over, I'm going to add a slot to it. And we're going to drag and drop in our track creator. All right, so let's add a slot to this. And we are going to assign it the basic track creator. All right, and it should do its thing. It should create the track footprint and flatten out the terrain where the track is. And there we have it. All right, it looks like the track creator needs to be rebuilt from when I started the new session. I should also mention that the curve editor has changed a little bit over here. All right, still works the same, it's just the UI's changed. Very cool. All right, so now we've got our terrain all flattened out where the track is. So we can go to our terrain creator over here, and we can just turn off that footprint so we don't see it. Voila. Very nice. We're doing good now. All right. So you can see all of our smoothing is working out nicely. Very cool. That is what I'm talking about. All right, so with that, we're good to go. Let's take a look at some of the contents here. So Currently, we're producing just the terrain, which is great. That's where you want to go and find all your terrain data. But yeah, everything's working out nicely. I'm liking it. Okay, so let's move forward and start to build out some shapes that we can allow artists to import into our terrain so they can modify it from a more artistic standpoint. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to create these individual mountain shapes or mountain stamp type deals that we can actually move around the level. And I really want each of these stamps just to represent like a terrain feature. So like one mountain or maybe a couple rolling hills. Just a feature that the level designers can go and then stamp around. Now, you can always go and create these stamps and things like Gaia or World Machine and just import them. But what we're going to do is we're going to create it all in Houdini because Houdini rocks, first off, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to, I'm going to show you guys how to embed all your shapes into one HDA. So basically you have kind of like a mountain creator, right? And you can let the level designer go and select between all your different mountain presets. Okay, so we're going to go and take a look at how to create all of that. Okay, so let's get our mountain shapes going over here. So what I'm going to do is actually turn everything off. All right, just select everything and then hit one of the blue flags and you'll be good to go. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create another geometry node. All right, and this is going to become our mountain generator. So this is going to be IP mountain generator. And I keep going back and forth between creator and generator. So funny. Should probably stick to one name. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but just for organizational purposes. All right, so what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to turn back on the grid too so I can see where I am. And I'm going to drop down another height field. Now, this particular HDA, and it doesn't necessarily need to be an HDA, but you might want to move it between different Houdini projects, so that's a quick way to do that. What we're going to do with this is we're going to generate just single mountains with this. Okay, so I'm going to make this relatively small. Let's do like 256 by 256. All right, and the reason why I'm making it small is because it's just a single mountain. I really just want one mountain. And what I'm going to do is create a tube. Okay, I just need a really basic mountain shape here. You can also create, actually let's do this. Let's do a box. Let me show you guys this. The tube I was going to make a cone out of, but what we can do with the box here is we can scale this guy up quite a bit. So let's do 128 for that guy. All right, let's turn on our height field there. And let's just drop down a transform node, and we'll rotate this, I don't know, 45 degrees, like so, and then maybe 45 degrees on the Z. There we go. Yeah, something like that. And then we can clip it. Like that. Gives us kind of a cool rough mountain shape. All right. And maybe we want to just pull it down a little bit. So let's just do something like this. So we don't have any of those ledges. There we go. I'm just making a really rough shape there. And we can play around with the overall Y size, Z size, and the X size. So we'll get something that we like. Yeah, and you could rotate it and tumble it around. Let's actually just do this by hand here. I'm really just looking for a mountain shape here. All right, let's turn on the scale, and you can hit M on the keyboard to switch between world and local. That's kind of what I was looking for there. Yeah. Cool. Okay, let's start with that. Maybe we'll start with a couple of them. But let's just start with that. Let's go and project that onto our height field. All right, so let's go and say project. So I'm going to start typing out project. There we go, height field project. And I want to project our cube onto our height field, because what we can do at this point is we can turn that into a mountain shape. Right? So it's a little more controllable than using noises, right? Because then we're not trying to find that perfect spot on the noise. Okay, cool. So let's use a distort. So I'm going to do height field distort by noise. And we'll do a little curling action to it. Always gets it looking kind of cool. You can also switch it over to Simplex and really pump that guy up there. And you start creating mountains. Really rough mountain shapes. And these are great for level designers just to place around on their own. And if you want to be stylized about it, you can really control the shapes that you want to, which is why I like doing this particular process. Alright, so let's look at what the curl looks like. That one's always way more aggressive. Pretty cool though. Yeah, something like that. I think will work. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to drop down a feature, mask by feature node, because I want to actually slump this a little bit. So let's go and do this. And I want to select all of the side slopes. Alright, so we'll select something like that. And we're going to move all that material down to the bottom so it creates this really cool mountain shape. So let's do a slump like so. Cool. Right, so we can go and just keep doing this more and more. You start to create these cool looking shapes. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Let's clear the mask. Very cool. So now it just feels natural, right? So wherever this meets the terrain, at least we'll have some natural features. Kind of giving the erosion a little bit of help. You could even go and erode this maybe a couple frames. So let's go and do that first up here. Let's drop down an erode node. And let's pump that guy in there and see what we get. Alright, so let's do like freeze at frame 5 here. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Alright, so let's turn off that visualization. I don't need to see that anymore. Just really want some subtle, natural looking stuff. And then we slump it even more. Very cool. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, cool. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I am going to convert this to a mesh. Alright, so I want to do a convert, a height field convert. And that is around here at the bottom. Very good. Alright, so let's go and put that in there, and voila, we have a mesh all of a sudden. How cool is that? And it's relatively low poly. You can always check the poly count by hitting the info box. 16,000. So what we can do, let's actually just clip off the unneeded stuff there at the bottom. So I can drop down a clip and just lift it up ever so slightly. Yeah, look at that. Kind of a cool looking mesh that we can place and scale and rotate. The best thing about it, it's all procedural, so I can go and change the shape of this guy and change the amount of distortion and get new mountains out of it. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, but I'm going to create a bunch of, or not a bunch, I'm going to create just a couple different features of this. The last thing we need to do with this particular mesh is export it. So I'm going to drop down a ROP geometry output node. And the reason why I want to export it is because I'm going to actually embed the geometry into an HTA that we put inside of our game engines. That becomes the tool that the level designer then goes and selects which mesh they want to use. Okay, so it'll become more clear as we get farther into this. All right, so with this ROP geometry node allows us to export models from Houdini out to the BGO format, okay, or STL. Those other types of geometry formats. We're just going to stick with BGO because that'll contain and retain all of the information about this model. It'll retain all the attributes. So what I'm going to do is pick the location of where I want to save it, and I'm going to put it into my geo folder, okay? And I'm going to give it a logical name like mountain001.bgo. All right, now that's Houdini's native format, .bgo. And so it retains all the attributes, which makes it really powerful. I'm going to hit accept and then save to disk. There we go. Now, if we were to navigate to our HDA folder and then go up one, you can see we have the BGO file here. Very cool. We just exported out our mountain. So with that, I'm going to close out the lecture, And in the next lecture, I'm going to show you guys how to create an HDA that includes embedded assets. Okay? We'll get our mountain generator all set up. Thanks so much. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at a way to create a procedural mountain shape, just a single mountain by itself, let's talk about how we can create a tool that allows a level designer to pick from a bunch of these different presets. Okay, so let's jump back into Houdini and take a look. Okay, so I went and made, I think, about 6 presets. This is one of the cool ones. This is kind of for those low areas. All right, so a quick way to take a look at all your presets is to drop down a file node. All right, and you can just import them by finding the file. So in my case, because I numbered them 0 to 1 or 1 to 5 here, so I made 5 presets. If I click this little show sequences as one entry, I can select just that, and what happens is now the file node is hooked up to the time slider down here. So if we put this to 5 down there and show this guy, you can see we can go through all of our different presets that we made, or that I made. Okay, so I kind of went from really tall to really sharp and kind of cool angle to a little bit more dumpier, and then finally to some lower lens stuff, and then finally all the way down. All right, so I kind of wanted to cover a range of elevation and shape and flat areas and sloped areas. All right, I try to get enough variation. The level designers will definitely have opinions here, and sometimes they'll just make them inside of Gaia or World Machine, and we'll just import them with height maps kind of thing. Okay, so that is how you can view all your presets that you've made so far. All right, makes it easy if you number them appropriately. All right, so let's jump up and out, and I'm going to create, let's move this guy over here. It's a good tool. Make that into an HDA just so you can carry it around. I'm going to make another geometry node, and this is going to be the node that actually goes into the game engine. So I'm going to call this IP mountain stance. All right, there we go. And inside of here, what I want to do is I want to drop in a file node. All right, and these file nodes are basically going to look up a geometry file, a path. But because we want to switch between a bunch of these guys, and the path to these models here, so currently I have them stored in my project over here, right inside of this geo folder. This path might change. So what we need to do is we need to embed all of our geometries, all these BGeo files. We want to embed those into our HDA. All right, and then we'll be able to switch between them here. So how do we do that? So first steps, let's go and right-click on this guy and say Create Digital Asset. We'll get this guy ready to go. All right, and we'll capitalize this. There we go. And I'm going to save this now into my job folder, into HDAs. Hit Accept and Accept. We'll get rid of those nasty spare parameters. Okay. Cool. So let's hide our default UI here. And what I want to do over here is make these invisible. What I want to do is I want to come over to this Extra Files tab. All right. This is where we can embed geometry or textures or a lot of things actually in here. So I use it mostly for just embedding textures and models into my HDAs. Now, your HDAs will get a lot larger because you're storing static assets inside of your HDA, but it's usually a nice thing to do, especially if you have some default textures that you just want to automatically have go with your models. You can embed them this way. So what I'm going to do is go to this file name, and this file chooser right here, and I want to go to my geo folder, and we're going to select all these guys right here and hit Accept. All right, and I'm going to say Add File. And there we go. We've now embedded those geometries into our HDA. Very cool. So what I'm going to do is hit Apply and Accept. All right, and now what we need to do is figure out how do we get access, and what do we type into here to get the geometry off of the HDA. So that's what we're going to learn in the next lecture. Welcome back. Okay, so what we're going to do is learn how we refer to an asset that's embedded into our HDA. It's using a little something called the opdef function. Alright, so let's go into Houdini and take a look. Alright, so here we are inside of Houdini, and I need to put in some sort of path here to the embedded asset that's inside of our HDA. Now, if we go up to the documentation for this, I'll show you where it is. If you go to Houdini 17.5, digital assets, underneath the creating assets area, it's right here. Referring to embedded assets, asset files using opdef. All right, and what we need to do is we need to type something like this. So opdef colon dot dot, or just one dot and then a question mark with the name of the file. Okay, so let's try that out. So I'm going to do opdef colon dot question mark and then mountain underscore 001.bgo. And you can see it didn't find it, and that's because we need to go up one more. I need one more dot. There we go. Very cool. All right, so we should name this. We should call this mountain 001. I should also mention that you can lock geometry. Like you can go and load it up from a path and then lock it right here, and it will also embed it. But I really wanted to show the opdef because it's a little bit more of a professional way to do that. Locking it, it's okay. I mean, it works basically the same way. I can't actually come up with any downsides to it. Anyways, I still use opdef. All right, so I'm going to copy this guy, and all I need to do is just change the number over here. There you go. So now we have the next one. So I'm just going to wire that into my switch, and I'm going to type in 3 for this. So you can see why it's good to have a nice naming convention for this, because then it goes super fast when you need to create all the different presets. Very good. And that should be our last one. Okay, so let's wire in number 4, like so, and number 5. Very cool. Okay, so this becomes our stamp switch right here. This is how we're going to let the level designer switch between which piece of geometry they want to use inside of the Houdini engine. And while we're at it, we should give it a little bit of color. Why don't we just add kind of like a rock color to it or something. You can go and create a gradient and everything, but at this point, I really just want kind of just something that isn't white. Let's just do kind of a grayish color. That'll look pretty good in the engine. All right, cool. And again, I'm just going to drop down a null node. Just stay in form here. So out stamp. There we go. And there we go. So on our HDA, let's right click on this and say type properties. All we really need to do is create a little slider that allows us to select between all those. Now you can make an ordered menu too, but I'm just going to keep it simple for now because I really want to get this guy into the engine so we can start to see how we're going to work with all this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to call this the stamp switch and stamp switch. There we go, and we're going to lock it between 0 and 4 because that would be the 5th one. All right, because we're starting at 0. And our default will be 0. That's fine. Okay, there we go. Very cool. And there we go. That's how we embed all this stuff in our HDAs. Pretty cool stuff, huh? All right. Let's move on to the next lecture and get this all hooked up with our terrain so we can start to stamp the mountains onto the terrain. Okay, so let's now test out our mountain stamps inside of Unity. All right, so there's nothing Unreal specific or game engine specific, I should say, with this particular HDA, the mountain stamp HDA. So we're safe, to just stick with Unity for now. All right. Anytime there's a difference, or I have to, show you guys how it differs between the engines, I'll show you for sure. All right, so let's jump into Unity and give it a whirl. All right, so I've already gone ahead and imported the Mountain Stamp HDA into Unity over here. And what I want to do is I'm going to come over here, just to the side here, because this is the issue that we run into when we're using noises. Sometimes you get this area where, you really want some mountains over here. And maybe the base pass noise is fine, and you want to keep some of that, but you really need to dress it up. All right, and the level designers are always going to want to do this. And so what I have been doing lately is I've been creating these mountain stamps, and it's really been helping out the level designers. They really like it. And so I wanted to show how I go about doing that. And, the process isn't really that tough. So let's go and drag and drop the mountain stamps into Unity over here. And there we go. Look at that. We have a mountain over here. Pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so now I can go and start to place these and rotate these to hide certain parts of the level, right? And the designers will go through and they'll just sit here and, design stuff, based off that base noise. So honestly, you don't really even need to have some of this really high stuff in the base noise. We can do all the mountains with these guys. All right, you can scale and rotate all these things. And we can also switch between the different mountains as well, so we get different mountain shapes. All right, we can duplicate it like so. And actually, the official way to duplicate an HDA in here is to use the duplicate asset. There we go. And now, we need to rebuild this guy. And this guy. There we go. Cool. All right, so then we just come over here, we'd rotate it maybe, something like that, and pull it downwards, maybe select a different mountain type for it, do stuff like this, kind of move it around. All right, one area that I really want to focus on here, so this time I am going to use the Control D to duplicate it. Let's go and get a different mountain. Let's try number 2. Oh, I had the wrong one selected. And now I've got all these guys, so let's put the one right there. All right, let's get rid of these guys. Let's just drag out a new one. Alrighty, and I'm going to come over here. Maybe we'll make this guy really big in the background. Really take up some space, but kind of squish it down a little bit. That's kind of cool to scale this guy in the X and Z and rotate a little bit. So you want to kind of get some major, shapes in place. Start hiding, the areas in your terrain, stuff like that. Maybe keep this nice and flat here. It's like a big ridge or something. All right, let's drag in another one. So I'm going to go and create another mountain stamp over here. And I definitely keep all these disconnected from the terrain while I'm working with them. Because if you try to put in, like 20 of these into the HDA and try to move them around after you've already attached them to the terrain, it will move really slow. So this is why I made this shape. Because I actually want to lift up parts of the track over here. So I want to just kind of give these little areas right in the middle of the track. Now, obviously you don't have to do this. This is kind of what I was envisioning for this little demo. Something like that. And just kind of pull it down a little bit. Just get it inside more, because it's going to erode, and yeah, it's kind of what I was looking for. Push it up a little bit. Like so. We'll put some trees and some rocks on this. It'll be kind of cool. Alright, so looks like everything's functioning. It basically works the same exact way inside of Unreal. Going to create another one here. Oh, whoops, I made a road cone. Alright, let's put in the mountain stamp. And I'm going to switch it all the way to that one, the last one in the list. And we'll just kind of add on to it. So what I'm going to do is go and start to design out some of this stuff here a little bit. And I'm going to do it off camera because I could spend hours on this, honestly. So I'm just going to mess around with it a little bit and get a nice little layout going. And I'll be right back and show you guys how to hook up the terrain to it. Thanks so much. Howdy, guys. All right, so I really just wanted to do a really quick recording session of me going out and laying out some of the terrain stamps, just so you guys can get a feel for, how I go about it, at least when I'm laying out these mountains and stuff in the background. Okay? So, the video's all sped up. It only takes a couple minutes. Just thought it'd be interesting. So, let's watch. Okay, so what I want to show you guys in this lecture is how you can actually create your own exporters for all these stamps that we've been creating. Okay, so what I've found when working with these stamps is at the end of the day, when you're ready to go, you've got a nice layout of all your mountain stamps. It's nice to be able to actually export out all the stamps into a single combined mesh, and we're going to export to the BGO format. Okay, and this is useful because you can actually send all these stamps off to another artist and they can work on it and stuff like that. But it also allows you to manipulate it later on inside of Houdini, and it also makes it faster to snap the terrain to all these mountains. Okay, so I wanted to walk you guys through the process. All right, so I went through the process and I set up the background mountains basically, and I basically made it so you can't really see past those mountains, which is totally natural to do for a level like this. I don't really ever want to see the horizon too much. These mountains might be a little bit tall, but I'm going to keep moving forward and show you guys how we get all of this information out to a separate file format. Okay, so we can export this to BGO or OBJ or FBX from within the Houdini engine. Now this does require at least a Houdini Indy license to export to FBX, but you can export to BGO and OBJ using Apprentice, which is actually quite powerful. Okay, so let's go and take a look. I have all these mountain stamps up here, okay? And what I want to do is, rather than put in another object input for my parameters, which would really slow this whole system down, right? Because there's a lot of HDAs. Currently I have 13, or roughly 13 stamps there. And assigning that would just really bog the system down. So a quick way to make this work a little bit faster is to really just decouple the mountain stamps from the terrain. You can leave them in place. They're going to literally just get projected to the terrain, so it'll look exactly like this, just without all the layers and stuff like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to re-import just a single mesh for the terrain to snap to, and that'll be much faster for the terrain to work with. Okay, and this is very specific to a Unity thing. Inside of Unreal, I've had more success with literally assigning all the stamps to the landscape and being able to, in real time, move the mountains around. So I'll show that here in just a little bit, okay? And what I want to do is I need to go back into Houdini over here. And I am going to, and there's actually already my test stamps there. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to create another utility HDA. So I'm going to just actually put these guys over here. These are all my tests. You guys are more than welcome to pop them open and take a look. All right, so that's kind of where I figure things out first. All right, just make sure I know what I'm talking about when I get onto the mic. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new geometry node. This is going to be a really simple HDA. You'll be quite surprised. And I'm going to call this the IP stamp exporter. Now, you could totally just call this the BGO exporter or OBJ exporter if you want. I'm just going to, kind of stay in the theme here. And so let's create a digital asset out of that. And I'm just going to lop that off and put capitals in for these guys, like so. And then go to the job folder, HDA, and I'm going to save it in my Houdini project and hit accept. All right. Now, let's go and hide all of our default UI. All righty. There we go. I'm going to hit apply. And now all we need to do in here is put in an object merge node because we want to pull in a bunch of geometry. So we're going to say, in this case, get stamps. There we go, get stamps. And we're going to import all their transforms into this object so we keep their world space. Okay, and then I'm going to do a ROP geometry output, like that. All right, so this is our exporter. Let's do that. So this ROP geometry output allows us to export to BGO or OBJ or STL, any sort of format, whatever you put at the end of it. If Houdini supports that format, then you can export to it using this ROP geometry output, and it works inside of the Houdini engine. Super cool. Okay, so a couple things that we need to do. I'm going to remove this output file, all right, and I want to promote my object one. All right, so we're going to say input stamps right here, and input stamps, like so. Hit apply, so we make that connection, and then I want to pull out where we want to save it to. And let's actually put a little separator there. All right. So this is going to be the option or a file browser to allow us to determine where to save our file. And we're going to drag and drop our save to disk button. All right. And it'll show up as a button and it'll allow us to actually export out the geometry. It's pretty cool. All right. So with that, that's our HDA. So I can just right click on this and say save node type. Very cool. Now let's go back into Unity over here. And let's go and import it and test this out. All right, so I'm going to go to the stamps exporter. There you are. I'll copy you and paste you over here. Very cool. All right, there we go. So now we have an exporter in here. So I'm going to drag and drop this into the scene over here. And I'm going to hide all my mountains. So that's why I put it into a group. So I can just go over here and just hide all. All right, and so all we need to do is come over here, and I'm going to switch this over to HDA, and I'm going to say add selection. Now this time what it's going to do is it's going to give me this little pop-up window and ask me to select a bunch of objects, a bunch of HDAs. And currently, because I have all the mountain stamps turned off, I'm going to set this to disabled, and it shows me all the disabled HDAs. And so now I can just roll through here and select all these guys. Very cool. And hit accept. And what it's going to do is it's going to load it into the HDA, combine it all into one mesh because we're using just that one single object merge node, and then we'll be able to actually export it out to a file. And look at that. So now all the mountain stamps are off, but we now have all of these meshes merged together as one. Super cool. Okay, and now all I need to do is determine our output file. So I've already gone and created one, but let's do another one. So let's say test mountains 002. And then what we're going to do is say save to disk. And when the button lifts up, you're good to go. So to verify that that worked, let's come back into Houdini over here. And I'm going to come into this file one node. So let's just create it. We'll do another file node. There we go. And in this file node, I want to load up that geometry. So I'm going to go to my job, my geo, and let's load up Test Mountains 002. And look at that. We just exported all of our mountains out of Unity. And this also does work in Unreal as well. So if you ever need to export geometries out and combine them all together, this is a great way to do it. Even if you just want to export geometry out. Because now what I can do is I can pass this off to artists. We could separate it out, maybe play around with it a little bit more. Who knows? Now you have the geometry, which is great. Okay, so with that, we are now ready to snap our terrain to this particular mesh. It'll be a lot easier to load this mesh into our terrain creator rather than assign all of the mountain stamps to it. All right, so we're going to do that in the next lecture. Okay, so let's take a look at how we actually bring back in our VGO file into our Terrain Creator HDA. All right, let's jump back into Houdini. All right, so all we need to do now is update our HDA over here. So I'm going to dive into the Terrain node here. And what I want to do is right after all of this, after the final mask clear here, okay, what I want to do is drop down a file node this time. All right, so I'm just going to drop down a file node, and this is going to be import stamps. All right, and I'm just going to get rid of the default VGO for now and turn off this error. All right, I'm going to set it to no geometry so it doesn't throw the error. All right, cool. And then I'm going to do a height field project. Okay, and I'm going to wire that up and pull that guy in there and just put that into the stream there of nodes. Cool, so what we need to do is we need to promote the file path. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put it in our import objects. So I'm just going to drag and drop this geometry file into my import objects right there. All right, and this is going to be called import stamps. And import stamps, like so. All right, I'm going to hit apply, and that should be good. So this is going to import whatever geometry we feed it. All right, it could be an FBX as well. All right, it'll basically take whatever. And so I'm going to hit apply and accept, and that should be good to go because our height field project is set to maximum, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. And we don't have anything over 1,000 meters, so cool. So let's go and save our node like so. And then let's go and jump back into Unity over here. And I'm going to load up my folders. All right, and let's copy over the new version of the Terrain Creator. Very cool. All right, so I just need to import it one more time, or rebuild it, I should say. So go to Terrain Creator, hit Rebuild Asset. All right, so I just need to go and reset up a few of my parameters here. All right, so if we go into our import object, so we have this import stamps now. Super cool, with a little file browser. So let's go and get my defaults set back up, or I should set these as my defaults from now on because I've been finding myself setting this quite often, and we're getting to the point now where I'm getting pretty settled on my settings, all right, and so I need to update my default parameters here. So I just want to turn off the track footprint. I'm going to set that to a default too. All right, and we're going to switch this over to HDA, and I'm going to hit Add Selection, and I'm going to select the track creator once this guy pops up here. All right, I'm going to set it to Active, and let's select the basic track creator, hit Accept, and it'll go and flatten out the terrain area there. Cool. All right, so now what I want to do is I need to make sure I hit Reset Simulation. You can see that our current terrain is still set at 513. So we just need to hit Reset Simulation so it updates the new erosion with the new terrain size and all that stuff. So this is going to run the erosion algorithm for 5 frames, so it shouldn't take too long. All right, so now we're back in business here. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to import our final terrain. So I went ahead and finished up all the mountains and stuff like that. And so what I'm going to do is select my final mountains BGO. So I'm going to select that guy, hit open, and you'll notice after a little bit of cooking, our terrain will now be snapped to all of our mount stamps. All right, there we go. All right, so I went and modified them a little bit too. So boom, look at that. So we got a little bit of terrain in the middle there. All right, just a little bit of height. We got a little bit on the sides there. We got some new mountains in place. Yeah, it's looking pretty cool. All right, cool. So with that, we're pretty much good to go. So I'm going to go and take a little bit and run through some of the Unreal differences in the next lecture. But for Unity, we are good to go. We now have our terrain all set up. We use some stamps to sculpt our terrain with. And now this is perfectly ready for scattering. So we need to start putting on trees, and grasses, and rocks, and stuff like that. Okay? Cool. So let's keep moving forward. Okay, so now that we've seen how to do the whole process for all the engine stamps inside of Unity, let's just take a quick look at some of the differences inside of Unreal Engine. Okay, so let's talk about some of the differences here with the Unreal Houdini engine, okay? And so what I've done is I've gone and laid out a couple mountains, all right, just like you've seen in the Unity workflow. They're basically identical. You basically just drag and drop out a mountain stamp and then choose the stamp that you want, like so. Unreal always waits for you to let go of the UI element to finally change. All right, so that's one of those differences. It's pretty cool. All right. I really like this shape for some reason, just because it looks so impressive. It's like one of those ocean cliff type things, or just a massive tectonic plate. Yeah, and then anyways, you go over here and just start to scale these guys up, and I just kind of place them wherever I like the look of the mountain range kind of thing. I always like to look down, in here. And I don't necessarily want super high mountains for this particular level. It's not going to be like super dramatic or anything like that. Okay, cool. So the difference is here, whenever I go and drag and drop in the stamp exporter, so let me actually deselect all this stuff here. I'm going to drag and drop in the stamp exporter into the scene. And after all the parameters come up, I can go and center it up. So that's very important for this. That way your mountains aren't offset in the final VGO. Okay, so now the way that you actually go and select these guys is a different type. You don't actually set this to asset input. Because if you set it to asset input, it'll only let you select one HDA. And I have 4 mountains here right now, right? So the difference here inside of Unreal is you need to select World Outliner Input. And what that does is it creates this new type of selection method that we haven't used yet. And so the way it works is we hit this button right here, Start Selection. You hit that once, all right, and you can see it switches over to Use Current Selection. Well, we just need to come up here and just select all these mountains by holding Control down on the keyboard. All right, and once you do that, you need to come back to the button and say Use Current Selection. All right, and it adds all those guys to the list. And that's what we're looking for. All right, so you can see now, if I were to turn off all my mountains, I now have them all merged into one geometry. Cool, so then what I can do is I can go to the stamp exporter, come down here and specify a file. So I actually have, let's go to my history here. I actually have created a test one just to make sure I wasn't crazy. And then I'm going to hit Save to Disk. All right, so then inside of Houdini, I'm going to go into my test geometry here, and I'm going to load up that Unreal Mountains. So let's load that up, and voila, there's our mountains. So we were successful. Okay, so let's go back to Unreal here really quick. Cool, so now we got that going. I'm going to turn off the stamp exporter, and now for our terrain, if we go to our terrain creator here, it's the same process. So we can just select this guy right here. and it'll stamp it onto our terrain. After this goes through there, I should mention I've been messing with the terrain look a little bit more, and so I added a second erosion after the mountains because they weren't getting eroded. And I felt it looked really cool. Alright, we probably need to reset the simulation here. I've also been messing around with erosion time. I obviously can't, do it here on video because if I put this up to like 50, it'll take a while. You know what I mean? Alright, and I finished cooking. Finally. Took about a minute for that guy on 10. So, once you put it up to like something like 50, it can take like good 4 or 5 minutes. There we go. Now we're starting to build up our little mountains on the sides there. And I've made the erosion a little bit more extreme, like the actual intensity of the erosion in the node. So that's why it eroded it more. But I'm actually kind of digging that. It's pretty cool. I have these mountains off in the distance there. I mean, all this is going to be covered in trees and rocks and grasses and stuff like that. So we still need to get to all that stuff. All right. With that, I'm going to go and finish this level up. I'm just going to do a quick pass on all the mountains here, just like I did in Unity. So we have a nice Unreal. Oh, and I need to make sure I pull off a little bit more off the track there. Cool. So I'm going to go and finish all that stuff up. And then in the next section, we are going to start to make some foliage. All right. So let's do a quick review of all the stuff we've covered throughout this section. Okay. I lied there for a second. I want to actually show one more thing in here. And what I wanted to do was show you guys what I do with the thumbnails here. That's why I totally forgot about it. But for Unreal stuff, what I like to do is I'll turn everything off except for one particular asset. So turn that off. Right? And maybe we select it or something like that. Don't do that. Keep it like that. And what I'll do is let's turn off the road cone too. I'll come into the HDA for this particular guy right here, and I'll do asset actions and capture thumbnail, right? That way I know what that particular HDA is responsible for instead of having to read the stuff. I wish I could do that in Unity. Maybe you can. I'll have to look into it more, but I've just been using Unreal a lot lately for work stuff, and so I don't need any of these guys open anymore. There we go. So let's do like the terrain now. We'll do something like this. So where's the terrain? Creator. So asset actions. There we go. Perfect. Right, it's kind of cool. It gives you a nice little visual indication of what your HDAs are building. All right, so anyways, that's the last thing I wanted to show. Now we can go review what we're going to cover, or what we covered in this particular section. Let's do one more, just because it's fun. It's super satisfying. All right, kind of rounds out the tool creation process. All right, that's enough. Thanks so much. All right, so let's do a quick review of all the topics we covered throughout this section. So we looked at how to flatten the terrain around the track area. Very important. We just want to clear it out so we can go back and add very specific shapes to that area of the terrain. All right, I find that just to be a little bit more controllable from an artistic standpoint. All right. We also took a look at how to create the mountain stamps, just from a really quick cube or a box that we created, and then we just kind of disturbed it a little bit and turned it into a mountain. And I really find that this is a very helpful technique when it comes to creating terrains because it allows you to really design how your terrain looks, from different angles in your level. You could also just import any shape for that matter if you just want to stick to really basic shapes just to give yourself a really rough terrain that you then process through World Machine or Gaia. At least you know that wherever you place those mountains or those large shapes, they're in the spot that you want them to be in your level. Okay? And then we saw how we worked with the mountain stamps inside of Unity and inside of Unreal. And we learned how we could actually export geometry with the Houdini engine. Now this works even with the FBXs. All right? You have to have at least an Indy license. But if you don't, if you're just still working with Apprentice, you can still export to BGO or OBJ. Really cool. We also took a look at how to snap the terrain to our mountain stamps. Really cool stuff because now we're really starting to define and kind of sculpt our height map